person who's asking questions was on that committee, so I assume he knows these.
You do want to make an announcement to these people.
Sit over here.
Let me get my hat.
Okay. Well, you don't get out of line.
Listen, I promise there's no license.
I wouldn't say
It
that.
served me well for a long
I
time. I
wouldn't
think
say
it's
that
time to
because
move on.
it's going to be a block. It's going to
Something
be
like 60 bucks. I asked the guy at the police store, why did you want to see it? How many people buy these? I said, well, how many people buy these new things?
There you go. Exactly.
Generation. Eric.
Yeah, come
More,
on.
actually.
Is this the same one I just got the other day?
Rich, I don't worry about it. As soon as you leave here, it's going to be on the block. Yeah. For him to.
I agree. 317 now.
This is personally.
This is
I have
new?
a person to
It's got today's date on it.
wait until wrap up a lot of particulars. I know.
So it's better for me. He's going to make a move. See? I'm glad I had up. Yeah. Look at the bottom. You have the date.
Why is it different?
Look at the bottom on the left-hand side. The bottom.
I saw it. That it was for the town hall. The date's different, but I have it.
Yeah, because mine was different altogether.
Look the same to you?
I don't know. I had made some circles on here.
I guess good as Eric, he should know. He put it together. So,
You better record it.
I can keep, Walt, if you want to start, I'll move over to the other side here.
Bonnie, this isn't as informal as I had hoped.
I know, but it was better conducive in the round.
We're going to open this meeting of the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee. I'm going to make my normal announcement since this is a public meeting. I'm requesting all cell phones, electronic devices be turned off on a mute position as not to disturb the meeting. Any member of the public also has a right to make an audio or video recording of an open session of a public meeting. A member of the public who wishes to record a meeting must first notify the chair and must comply with reasonable requirements regarding audio or video equipment established by the chair, so as not to interfere with the meeting. The chair is required to inform other attendees of such recording at the beginning of the meeting. Okay, we have one. Okay, we do have someone that's recording. The Board of Selectmen just came out of executive. We had already opened it to resume now, so if the... Okay,
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
yes.
I would just like to offer a public apology to each and every one of you for not attending the recent meeting. I really don't have an excuse other than the fact that I just couldn't get here. But I want to offer, there was never any intention of offending anyone, and I just want to convey my sincere apologies.
Okay, Mr. Andrews.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'd like to make an announcement with regards to my personal intentions to move on professionally. I've accepted a job as the town administrator in Wareham, Massachusetts. I'm going to start my new job on April 16th. I'm going to work on a transition plan with this board and all the town departments with respect to the important jobs and tasks we have going forward. I've considered this matter with my family. This job is closer to home. I will be moving forward with this with the assistance of the board. I've made many friends and many folks have invested in me, and I've invested in the town. My commitment is to continue to move step by step regarding the, once again, multitude of very important tasks we have going forward, including the budget and audit. I've enjoyed working with each and every member of the Finance Committee, the School Committee, and the Board of Selectmen. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Okay, with that, We'll proceed with our regular meeting. Some,
Pardon me, but could you state the town again? Wenham? Which town? Which town are you moving?
Wareham, Mass.
Wareham, thank you.
It's just a couple vowels off, so we'll have to take it from there.
okay, Mr. Holmes. Okay, we're going to skip that first one, appointment emergency planner. Okay, discussion of town meeting articles. Town meeting articles.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Attorney Bowen and our financial analyst Derek Sullivan, who's worked on many aspects of the articles, to walk us through them beginning. Attorney Bowen?
Thank you, Mr. Town Administrator. With the permission of the respective chairs, I'll just start off with Article 1 of the warrant on page 2. Article 1 is the traditional election article that appears on the warrant each year. There is a, but in any event, that's the standard article that we see every year. I guess that's probably about all there is to be said on that.
Yes.
Are we not talking about the budget, the 2013 budget first?
Oh, I didn't even see that. Sorry.
Thank you.
I went right
Skipped
by.
right over it.
I skipped right over it. Okay. See, someone's got me nervous already. So, okay.
Mr. Sullivan.
We'll back up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Larry, for that. I'm going to ask Mr.
Thanks for
Sullivan.
waking me up.
Mr. Sullivan, if you could, along with Superintendent Rabinovich, who we've been working very closely on many of the aspects of the budget, to walk us through, if you'd be so kind.
Good morning. I would say thank you for everybody coming on for me, one of the holiest days of the year, St. Patrick's Day. So today I've passed out a budget that has been updated as of, I would say it would be 5 a.m. this morning. So it is the most up to date. You'll see in the column headings, you will have the FY12 budget, the FY12 projected, the administration budget, and then the school committee budget scenario. The difference in the administration and the school committee budget is the number. If you look on page 5 of 6, and they're front to back, so it'd be your last page with the front side. You would see on the administration budget, the net school spending is $25,003,019. The non-net, $1,341,652, for a total of $26,344,671. Then you'll have the budget that the school committee voted on in the next column, $27,195,370 for net school spending, and for non-net, $1,585,277, for a total of $28,780,647. And that would be the only difference between those two columns. And the reason that we put this in there for the work papers for now is so that people understand where the difference is. And by charter, we do have to bring the school committee budget forward to town meeting. And that's where we would be at right now for it. To go through back to the very front, you'll see that really the main issue here is that our revenues versus last year have only raised a total of $745,174, and that'd be on page 2 of 6. So when our revenues only are projected to increase by a little under 1.5%, but you see that we have drastic increases in our budget, such as employee benefits, which are raising over 25%. Pension costs alone have raised by 16.74%, or $392,000. And as of today, I'm projected the health care benefits to increase by over 35%, closer to $1.6 million. Our debt service is up by 14.52%, or $113,425. And we received our portion of what we need to pay for the Upper Cape Cod Vocational Technical School, and that has increased by 9.28%, or $220,346. And realistically, that is a vote of the majority of the towns there. So even if we say no to it, if the other towns, which they voted yes, we do have to pay that increase for their full budget.
Just a point of information, have any of the other towns voted?
I've not received the voting record on there, but I can ask Kevin Farr for that. So we can go line by line, or...
The insurance, I don't think that, I guess in a sense, we need to look at the difference between what the healthcare holiday took out of this number and what it actually increased. I know it's a combination of the two, that number 1.6, but
we would have, through you, Mr. Chair, we would have voted in last year approximately $5.5 million for health care costs.
okay.
Mr. Solomon, before you continue, I think.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I needed to take care of some Board of Selectmen business between meetings. At this time, I'd like to go back to our agenda really quickly for kind of a housekeeping item. Lieutenant is here. You don't want to have him sit here through this whole meeting and then deal with him at the end. If we could do Lieutenant Walczak right now.
Well,
Lieutenant.
let's poll the board, okay? Is that all right with the rest of the board?
The Board of Selectmen.
Thank you.
As much as we like them and would love to spend the morning with them.
Yeah. The chief would kill me if he found out you were here till noontime. So, the matter at hand, fellow board members, as we discussed 2 weeks ago, was the formation of the local emergency planning committee, which Chief Stanley started about 3 or 4 weeks ago. John.
Yes.
And Lieutenant, I believe you're the go-to guy on this.
I've been doing a lot of the legwork on it. Yes.
Right. And so one of the issues that came up was the sanctioning of the board by the appointing authority as the Board of Selectmen in the town, so that there are no issues going forward with this committee. Chief Stanley contacted the emergency management agency, and they have come up with a quick motion for the board to sanction this group. So if I may, I make a motion that the Wareham Board of Selectmen endorse the efforts and formation of the Emergency Management Director and the staff in the formation of a local emergency planning committee and the LEPC's efforts to create a written response plan, create the training and emergency training of the emergency and responders, the exercising of a plan once a year, the collection and storage of data to meet public requests for the entire region, and all of the above in keeping with the Massachusetts Emergency Management Response Commission.
Motion made by Steve, second by Kara. Question? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? 5-0-0.
Lieutenant, unless you had anything prepared, you're done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you have any
Chairman, I
questions,
thank you and the fellow board members for your indulgence there.
we'll be having a public meeting. It'll be announced, I believe, May 17th, if
May
anyone would
17th.
like to attend at 10 a.m. But we'll make a public announcement on that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before you leave that particular subject, if I might, because this was a matter of a seminar held at the Mass Municipal Association as well. And it was put on by not only MMA, but also by Homeland Security, MEMA, and FEMA participation as well. And one of the things that did come up in these emergency plans is we're always prepared, as I imagine this particular committee is structured. But the town administrators who provided the seminar, one of whom was the town administrator from Munson, brought to everyone's attention that the one area that seems to always be left off of there is the town accountant. But then when MEMA and FEMA come in and start looking for all the emergency contracts, et cetera, it becomes an absolute nightmare. So I would suggest to the committee that they, and possibly maybe the chief, that they get in touch with some people and consider that addition, because paying the bills afterwards is probably equally as important as responding in the first 3 days. The crisis is the 3 days. The total problem is over several months.
If I may address that, within the framework of the LEPC, there is a fiscal agent. So that, and Mr. Andrews is our fiscal agent at this point, was voted in. But that is a key point of that. You're correct.
Mr. Chairman, if I could also, John, just reflect for the board and the Finance Committee School Board on the timeliness of the submissions and how myself and Justin Cole have been working closely with you on the submissions
Yes,
for the county.
It's very important, and it's going to get the police department, the fire department, public health, the hospitals, public works, everybody together, and it'll also, it's a federal mandate that each town has a LEPC, and we've been working very diligently, and I've been working with Mr. Andrews and the staff to recoup the money for the Tropical Storm Irene event.
Good point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
All right, same. Take care. Okay, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you.
Okay. One of the things I think that we can go through the budget, but in a way I'd like to give you a background as to what's been happening through expenses and our revenues, if you will. And you'll see that I've handed out a packet. You should all have this, which lists state aid on the front. Does everybody have a copy of that? Okay.
Derek. Do you have it? 'Cause I have it.
All right. The first page, marked page 1, is just a brief rundown of state and local aid from fiscal year 2009 to what's projected with the Governor's House 1, House 2 budget. You'll see that basically the easiest way to go through it is at the bottom, our net receipts, which is our local aid receipts from education, general government, less the assessments that we are charged. In FY09 was FY 2009 was $13,283,554. Today we're projected to receive $12,391,211, a little over $892,000 less than fiscal 2009. So, I always picture it as my own household budget. So if you look that, if you're making less today than you were 4 years ago, you know that your own finances are strained. The second page is the state aid from fiscal 2000, projected through 2015. But if you really go from fiscal year 2002 to fiscal year 2013, you'll see that our net state aid has decreased by $3,231,645. My point being on that is when you start thinking about, I guess maybe there's even a projection that we're spending wildly or not being conservative with our funds. The main issue here is that our revenue has decreased drastically over the years and is continuing to do so. And that's from the state level to us. If you move on to the next page, you'll just see a chart of our net state aid along with the linear line projecting where we're going on it. Again, it's showing a decrease on there. Page 4 is something you would have seen at the town administrator's report on the budget, but it's important as well because it's not just our state aid. Some of the national fiscal issues creep down to the local level as well. If you see that today we're receiving less money than we were in fiscal year 2005 by over $500,000. Next page, page 5, shows that one of the reasons is people are keeping their cars longer. They can't afford a new car. You're going to invest rather to fix your car than to buy a new one, because who has the money for a car payment? And the final page is Chapter 70 trends. And this is one of the largest issues here as well that the school and town together are facing. If you'll see in fiscal year 2001, our required local contribution was $13,164,613. And then the Chapter 70 aid we received was $11,252,161. So if you project forward to FY12, our required local contribution for FY12 was now $17,900,064. Almost $7 million more, while the local aid contribution was roughly a little under $1 million more. You can see on the bottom part, if you'd see the Chapter 70% of actual net school spending in FY 2001, it was just under 48%. Today, the Chapter 70% of actual net school spending, or the aid, is just under 39%.
If I can, just to acknowledge that in fiscal 12, that is an estimated number because the end of the year report doesn't go in until the end of spending for the 12-13 year for fiscal 12, and particularly with the healthcare holiday, where $1 million less was paid for school department employees. The actual net school spending will not be 5% above. It will be at 0%. So I just wanted to clear up that number, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Derek, I have some questions on the revenue side because as we look at the information, some of it can be very confusing to people. We had budgeted in school choice tuition and school construction as part of our revenues in the budget for fiscal 12, but we're projecting 0 and forecasting 0 going forward. Could you explain that, please? Because it is an accounting change.
Yes, it is. Those numbers, the school lunch and the school choice receiving tuition, actually do not come into the general fund. They go directly into, I believe, the school revolving accounts. And previously, how we had accounted for that was on the front page we'd put the school lunch and school choice receiving tuition, and then on page
6.
Page 6, if you see on there, you would have other cherry sheet offsets. That, as well as with the library, would be the same amount on there. There's also library received money that goes directly to the library revolving account that I didn't speak to on the front.
Okay, because I was gonna ask that question as well, because the library was 18,000 and is now 0. You're saying it's the same type thing.
Correct.
It's an adjustment from what we did previously.
Correct. So that money does not flow through the general fund. It goes directly to the school and the library.
It might also, Medicaid and CMAS in the budget for 12 are separate items, last two items, and they've been changed going forward, I believe. They've been moved up into estimated local rather than being their own in addition.
Yes, and working with the town accountant, Justin Colt, BMAG, he said that when we were speaking, that seems to be, especially for when we're working with the DOR to do our recap, that is the cleanest way to account for it. And this is the way that you put it in there, and we'll be able to fill out the buckets correctly. So the ultimate goal of now, what I'd call our budget worksheet and what we vote on, is to match up with what the DOR does to create a cleaner, streamlined process to have less issues.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This issue of CMAS and Medicaid goes back several years. It was a problem that we faced maybe 4 or 5 years ago when CMAS had the fire, and we somehow or other lost sight of the fact that they'd had the fire and we weren't going to get any more revenue from them, at least for a period of time. The FinCom at that time decided and asked, and in fact it was implemented, to break out the different line items for Medicaid, since it was a big number and was going down, as a matter of fact, separate from CMAS, and also the CMAS number. We knew at the time that the DOR had a different format, but we asked for, at the town level, and the town acceded to this, to break those two items out in particular so that we could follow them and monitor them and have a better sense as to exactly what was going on with some important items. Again, if it was just a matter of a few dollars here and there, it would be meaningless, but we're talking about fairly substantial sums of money. For instance, Medicaid at one time was in the neighborhood of, I'm going to take this a little bit out of context, was in the neighborhood of $500,000 or $600,000 a year, and it's dropped significantly. And I thought at the time, the FinCom thought at the time, that it would be a good idea to keep track of, in that case, a very large number. Similarly with CMAS. So I understand Derek's explanation, but I, for one, and the committee can determine this on their own, would like to see us go back, if you will, to the way we've done this in the last several years. That is to deaggregate some of the elements, some of the ingredients in the recipe, so that all of us can see exactly what's going into the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I might, I think Mr. Paulson's point is well taken, particularly since these are totally dissimilar functions. It's not like we're pooling two items that are close together, and CMAS, I believe, is involved with the burning of the trash, et cetera, and the other is involved, obviously Medicaid is Medicaid. I would suggest going forward, the presentation is up to the town administrator, I understand that, but I think it was good past practice, and I think we should probably just make a minor adjustment to the budget for that.
Okay, Mr. Solomon, you want to continue?
Thank you. And one thing is, I did not have the institutional knowledge on there, historical knowledge, so I was not trying to step on any toes there. So,
Mr. Chairman, since I was speaking previously, in fiscal year 12, we forecast no free cash for obvious reasons. We now know that we finished the year 2011 with a free cash number of 308. And typically what's happened in the past is some portion of the free cash that was available was carried over into the budget. I'm noticing that in 13 there is no free cash. And I've raised the issue because there's also no capital items in this budget either. And I'm wondering as to why we're not using any of the free cash.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, free cash of 307 and change, I think it's fiscally prudent to hold out to make sure that we have a solid position, not saying we couldn't go into the fall town meeting with a list of capital items. We now have, as you know, certified audits for fiscal 2010 and 11. The state has already, Governor has proposed the same plan as this year with regards to additional local aid, which we received last year, $120,001. If the state's able to close their books up. So I would recommend that this board's finance committee look forward to the fall town meeting with respect to additional certification of free cash and the potential, once again, if the legislature adopts it, which I have urged our state senator, state representative, and other representatives and senators to close their books up in early October, provide us with, last year they provided us, the cities and towns, with $65 million of extra dollars that they had left over, couple that with the free cash, and then go forward with the capital plan in the fall, Mr. Chairman. That would be my recommendation.
So your recommendation would be to take the 121 and the 300 and postpone it till the fall meeting, at which point we could address capital items?
That's my recommendation.
Thank you.
And if I could, Mr. Chairman, once again, if the same prescription holds as it did this year, the state closes its books up at $130 million positive position. They took $65 million for their respective needs, and they provided cities and towns with $65 million with additional local aid based on their closing up their books. That would be in the form of a resolution between the House and the Senate that would give us the knowledge that would get something, whatever that might be, 100 or 150, $200,000 of additional local aid. And then you'd have a real capital plan, because 307, in my opinion, is respectfully a good, solid position to have, to be maintained going into the fall, with additional dollars that would be coming forth, hopefully, to cities and towns. I don't know what our share of that would be, except to say that I think it's fiscally prudent to hold that, couple whatever we would get with the with additional local local aid that we would get from the state, and then put forward a capital plan that would be, once again, hopefully in the $500,000 range.
All right, to address the 307, the 121 that we received this year, you're also holding that per capital as well.
That's correct.
So the total basically is about 420, and then maybe a wonderful additional 121.
Perhaps
but that's just a promise, not even a promise. It's just a hint on the horizon from the state. We never look to the legislature for money until the check arrives, as you've so amply showed us with deposit slips.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You at the MMA, and I think it's important that we hold a very positive, stable fiscal position. Add the extra dollars that would come to the state. They've decided, once again, the governor's plan is to split it like they did last year. Take that split and then put forward the capital plan.
All right.
Thank you.
Mrs. Brown?
I understand where you're coming from, and but I don't feel that it would be prudent to, these capital items and just keep adding up and up and up, and we're all looking at school buses, and I just think that the responsible thing to do is to start digging into these capital items. I mean, people have spent hours and hours bringing these to people's attentions. What are we going to do? Wait for something to fall apart, or wait for a tragedy to happen, and then we've got to do it? I think we need to be proactive here, and we're not even being proactive anymore. We're still being reactive with the list of capital items that this town is facing. And my major concern is the children of Wareham.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just point out, thank you, Ms. Bronk, for that. The one capital plan item that is still in effect is the $100,000 we've committed to the school district. So that is in the school district's capital plan. If the committees respectively want to move forward with some parts of the capital plan. I know some parts of it, at least from my understanding from the last capital planning meeting, that we are looking at alternative methods to get some of the equipment that we need. But once again, the capital side of the school district's plan, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sullivan,
It's
is it not?
as part of closing the gap, if you will. That $100,000 for the capital has been moved into the net school spending line to try and bridge that gap right now.
Okay.
That was recently removed, so.
So I will stand corrected.
Yes. Mrs. Winslow?
I'm wondering if we can get, I see a lot of numbers and a lot of negatives here, Mr. Sullivan. What is the difference between what the town, you started off by saying that the charter requires that the town present the school committee's budget at town meeting. Obviously, if those two budgets differ, and by this worksheet it's clear that they do, then we're going to town meeting with an essentially unbalanced budget. What is the difference that we're looking at, and where in the budget is there for us to try and bridge that gap so that we can go before the people with a real plan?
Mr. Chairman, I think we're jumping way ahead. I think what we're trying to do is to establish the revenues first so we know what we have to work with. And I really need to think that we need to establish the fact that we have no more than the 52,359, if we might. I fully agree with you. I think you just defined the purpose of the whole meeting, was how to, and I don't think there's a quick and easy answer. There's a number of line items here that, if adjusted, would make a big difference. But if you would, the total number I think is probably the most thing. What is the difference? Which is probably 2.7. But I don't know that we want to go into a protracted conversation in general.
Mr. Heath, what I'm trying to suggest is that if we put these numbers out there at the beginning of the conversation, as we go through the budget, we can identify areas where there have been reductions, where there may be potential increases. It would be easier for the layperson who may be watching us at home on TV, or who may watch this in the future, to understand what we're talking about. I'm not suggesting that we jump ahead and skip the conversation, and I apologize if that's how it came across. I just think that we need to define the problem before we really get into all this, so that the people at home watching understand what the problem that we're trying to address today is.
The number, the gap, if you will, between what was voted in on the school committee and what we have in the administration budget is $2,435,976. That is a very big number.
Yeah, just let us know what page that you're on as you
That would be
identify.
that 5 of 6.
Yes, Mr. Holmes?
Through you to Mr. Andrews. Mark, you just said that that 308, the 100, right? Hopefully 127. Where is that now? Where does that sit now?
The free cash.
The actual money.
Yeah, free cash is not included on the worksheets through you, Mr. Chairman, to Selectman Holmes. It is a free cash position of the town that's been certified by the Department of Revenue. The 100, Mr. Sullivan has informed me that, I think working with Superintendent, that we have put it into the non-net school spending. And the promise going forward is that sometime in early October, we would get some signal from the Commonwealth under the current proposed budget by the governor that we would receive some form of additional local aid. So,
Mark, was the 100 from the meals tax? I thought I heard you say that one night.
The meals tax, I believe, is somewhere in the vicinity of $350,000, $360,000.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
The meals tax.
Meals tax would be, if you go to page 1, on there it's the first line of the estimated local receipts and reimbursements. With the DOR estimate from 2612, we took 95% of that, which works out to $396,178.
Right, and then at last town meeting, we voted to uptick that, what, .075 or whatever it was,
Yes.
right?
You're correct.
And the .075 figure was to go into a fund for capital expenditures, right? Starting
That's
in
correct.
this budget.
And that's
Right.
what you are correct.
So that's not the 100,000 that we've committed to the school department, is it?
In my proposed budget, 100 of the 396 was to go to the school department for capital needs originally presented.
All right. What's the .75 number
The .75
with the increase? The increase of .75.
390, Derek, on page 1, right? It's on 396.
That's what we're getting for a full 12 months at the 95% of the DOR estimate. And where that's covering for capital needs this year would be the new debt service that we have for paying for the sweeper that was out there, I believe the backhoe and the what was the debt service for capital items there. And then we also have capital items of police cruisers that we're still paying leases on, the third year of a 3-year lease and the second year of a 3-year lease.
I guess my question is this. We've charged us a food tax in this town for a long time, correct? What was that number? We increased it by .075, and there's a second number. The difference between the first number and the second number was voted on by town meeting to go for capital expenditures.
There was a
There's two numbers, right? And there's a difference.
We voted to raise the hotel motel tax from 4 to 6%, but the meals tax, it was the first time that it was implemented. The only other tax, you usually charge sales tax on the food, and then the meals tax is on top of that.
And the whole 0.05% goes to capital.
0.7, yeah, the
And what's that
0.7.
number?
That's
the 3?
396 number.
Okay. So out of that 3-something, someone has earmarked 100 for the school department in this budget. Correct? You can't, according to the town meeting vote, that has to go back to town meeting for the body to decide where that money is spent.
Point of information. While I completely agree with Mr. Holmes with respect to the spirit of the vote on town meeting floor, our attempt to actually allocate that money for capital was ruled, and I think correctly, by Council Bowen, that we could not do that. So the net result is, in fact, it simply went into the general fund. But I agree with you. The spirit of it and the way it was advocated was to do precisely what you're describing. But legally, that is not what happened.
Well, it wasn't just the spirit, with all due respect, Mr. Sweat. It was a vote. It's not the spirit. We don't deal with spirits. It was voted that way.
The motion that was voted did not require it to be used on capital, even though that's what I would have favored.
No.
Mr. McDonald? Excuse me, why don't we have the attorney sitting right there?
Well, Mr. Chairman, my recollection of the ruling is that in order to dedicate it in the fashion that had been suggested, it probably would have required a special act to create a new type of fund. And that absent that type of special act, it would have to go into the general fund. Now, of course, the vote would have created this, automatic machinery. That isn't to say that if the political will was there to treat it in that fashion, that you couldn't do it that way. But it can't be an automatic mechanism.
Mr. Chairman, if I might just finish that thought now with Mr. Bowen, through you. So, Mr. Bowen, you're saying that the article that was voted on at town meeting to raise meals taxes, .075, and to take those revenues generated and put it into a capital fund that all departments would compete for, you're saying that article was invalid, even though it was voted in favor by town meeting? So if you're gonna, I don't think you can separate the legality. I'm not a lawyer, but if the second half of the statement was bounced, so should the first half, and we probably shouldn't be charging that meals tax if we don't know what we're doing with it.
I think Mr.
I don't know how you can separate an article in a statement and make one invalid and the other valid.
You're asking the question, and the attorney for the town is answering it. So, Mr. Bowen?
Well, Ashwood, if you want to do the setup.
Mr. Chair, the article was not presented in that manner to the town meeting based on Attorney Bowen's advice. That's the difference. The article, as it was originally intended, after Attorney Bowen, if you recall, told town meeting that we couldn't accomplish what we were trying to accomplish simply through a town meeting article. We could only accomplish it through special legislation. The article was amended simply to increase the meals tax. There was no requirement that it be dedicated to capital items after the amendment. What?
Mr. Andrews?
Mr. Chairman, also,
Excuse me, Mr. Andrews.
Mr. Holmes makes a very important point, and I think if we harken back to the budget that I submitted on December 15th, before we got a better look at the revenues that Mr. Sullivan has gone over, we did set aside $100,000 for the school district. We did set aside monies for an ambulance. We did set aside funds for other capital needs, and then working through that budget process, because I think it's important for these bodies respectively and the general public to understand, we had to revert back to using those funds to hold departments whole, because otherwise you're really looking at the gap that we need to fill. You're talking about closing down departments. You're talking about closing down departments. So, well, I'm looking for feedback because my original budget back in December did have capital items built in using the meals tax. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sullivan. And we did try to straightforwardly go after issues like the school buses, but then we were literally forced to use those dollars to the best of our ability to try to close the gap, because you are talking about buildings being closed down. I don't know any other way to do it, and it's a big number to fix with regards to the challenges that we have on the revenue side. So the body wants to use it for capital versus closing down departments or melding departments together. That's fine. They give me that feedback, and we're happy to try to do that. But it's a valid point. We did take the spirit and intent and put it, if you go back to my December 15th budget, you'll see capital items listed as we were going forward. And then we got a closer look at revenue, almost 3 months later, with regards to making certain that we have a balanced budget based on conservative local revenues and what we know about what we believe to be, hopefully in a local aid resolution to cement the numbers for not only Chapter 70 local aid at $12,500,000 for the schools, and other dollars, and $1.552 million on restricted local aid for the town. So we had to pull back and plug in those gaps so that we can still function as a town. If the body wants to move in a different direction, then we need to know that before we get to town meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I tend to agree with Mr. Holmes. I think we need to check something very carefully, because in the springtime, as Mr. Bowen said, we could at that time not direct it anywhere other than the general fund. But my recollection is there was, in fact, this last fall, an article that said the entire amount should go to capital. The original article said 50-50 capital. We said you can't do that. You have to institute the tax. We instituted the tax. But my recollection is in the fall it came back, we said 50-50, and it was said, no, you can't split it like that. But I recollect an article being passed, Mr. Holmes. I think you may be correct, and I would hope that you would check the minutes, please. I also agree with Mr. Andrews' caution, though. If we did pass it, it still had to go to special legislation, which meant for this current budget year, it would go to the general fund, because it wouldn't go to capital until after that. So we would be treating it correctly for this year, but if there is special legislation, which I don't know, I thought it was filed, that going forward, it would have to be treated differently.
Mr.
But
Bowman,
if we could
run
check
that
the
down?
minutes, please.
Check it out.
Well, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, you have to draw some distinctions here on what's being said. My recollection of what was planned back a year ago was that this was going to be some automatic mechanism which, from that moment going forward till time immemorial, or at least until town meeting chose to vote otherwise, that there would be an automatic dedicated split of this revenue. And as I ruled at that time, and as I will confirm today, unless you have special legislation, you cannot do that, period. Now, that's not to say if going into a particular fiscal year, you have a revenue estimate, and here it's what, $396,000, Derek? That's not to say that you could not put forward a split, or the town meeting could not approve a split. Town meeting can approve a split of that money as it sees fit for this upcoming fiscal year. What I'm saying is it can't, at this meeting, approve the split for ensuing fiscal years without a special act. And so I think you have to understand the difference. So if the political will is there on your parts, on the part of town meeting, to divide this money in some particular fashion, that's great. Have at it. All I'm saying is you can't bind future years to a split without special legislation. That's all.
Mr. McDonald?
Actually, through you, Mr. Chair, this happened at Fall Town meeting where we went in. There was an article, and they were trying to move it. I believe the year was 2013. I believe that was the year that it would be put towards capital. And there was an amendment to make it 2012 almost immediately, but the conversation, and we had the conversation on our board as well, was that it required special legislation. Now, the question is there special legislation out there at this point? That's really what the question. I don't want to get bogged down. We got a $2 million number we're dealing with here, but is there any special legislation, any attempt to get any special legislation to make that happen at this point? There's the answer. That's why if there's no special legislation, then it goes to general fund, and it's up to the will of the body.
That's right. Mr.
Based on these comments, there was no split in the November town meeting. There's no split. It all went to capital. But there's no split.
Special legislation, and it required. There was never any special legislation put forth to whoever. And again, we're still waiting on sewer commissioner, so who knows? But there was no special legislation put forward, and if there is no special legislation, then the money goes to the general fund until that. Now, if there is some miraculously that put forth, then in the middle of this year, or maybe even in the start of the FY 2013, all of a sudden we're going to have a $396,000 addition to the 2.7.
Okay, excuse me. Mr. Bowen, go ahead.
I'll yield to.
Okay.
So that's my point. If there's no special legislation, then that 0.75% of the meals tax goes into the general fund. What's the number again?
178.
So if you take 2.5, subtract 386, you got 2.1 something, and we're having a good day so far. Let's keep going.
May I ask a question?
If the money goes into the general fund for the 0.75, it should be on this piece of paper. It is. And it should be used to narrow the gap on this issue. It's already in here?
Yeah.
Excuse.
It's already there.
Now that everybody's awake, Mrs. Begley.
Now we're all on board.
Mrs. Begley?
I have a question for Attorney Bowen. So, it did bring us around to an issue, though, is that the fact that we need special legislation if there's going to be a split for the funds. Who files the petition for special legislation?
With your permission, respective chairmans, if there's a town meeting article that petitions for special legislation, then the petition will be made. But there was never such a petition.
That's the question. Who?
Whoever puts an article on the warrant,
Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen, 10 citizens, you know, there are lots of people who could get something on the warrant. But once it gets on the warrant by whatever mechanism, and it's approved by town meeting, and it goes off to the legislature, and is approved by the legislature, and is signed by the governor, then you have special legislation.
So, short answer, the Board of Selectmen needed to submit the petition for special legislation for the language of that article. That's the short answer.
That is one answer.
Seeing no other hands, seeing no other hands, Mr. Sullivan?
Okay, so we're still, if we're going over the revenues, we've answered some questions, and basically the main point about it is that our revenues have not been keeping up to our expenditures, and even with new revenues and such, this year we've only projected for roughly $750,000 in new revenue, and as I was saying before, pension costs alone have gone up by $392,000. Catching up to the health care, bringing it whole again, is roughly $1.7 million right there. So you can see why we have a gap.
Mr. McDonald?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't have my ruler, and my big boy ruler that I use at work all the time, and I don't have my glasses, so we're really in a lot of trouble here on this. But it looks like we have a thing called an overlay reserve for $155,000.
That's correct.
We're trying to figure out what it is.
The That's left over from when we had the overlay. They didn't expend all those funds on abatements, and the assessing board has voted to release $155,000 for previous abatement revenues that they or funds that have been set aside for that they do not need.
Okay, thank you for now.
You're welcome.
Someone has their hand up? Bonnie, were you just putting your finger? Okay. Go ahead, Paul. Mr. Paulson?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just offer a thought on the issue of the...
Mr. Paulson has the floor. Excuse me. Mr. Paulson has the floor.
That's okay.
I'm trying to explain something.
Well, I'm going to try to explain something also, and with everybody here, and it's a kind of a pet subject of mine. This issue of the pensions and going up so rapidly. There's a little known but very important fact that we all should know, and I'm going to refer to a different body entirely. There's an outfit called CalPERS out in California, and they've been expecting that they would have a 7 3/4% return on their assets. They've just dropped that to 7.5%. Plymouth County, and I might add the state, but let's deal with Plymouth County. Plymouth County continues to use 8.25%. They refuse, absolutely refuse, because I've asked them on several occasions to perhaps consider dropping that to a different and a lower rate. The importance of that to this town, just for Plymouth County now, just for Wareham, for Plymouth County, our manager, is for every 25 basis point, every quarter point drop in the interest rate, that would cost the town of Wareham $50,000. Where Plymouth County to drop to the CalPERS rate, in other words, by 3/4 of a percentage point, that would cost this town $150,000 a year for every year going out for 19 or 20 years. And the point I'm trying to raise here is that these are the kinds of things that we have to think about. I'm not saying we don't think about them, but I will admit it's kind of esoteric, but nonetheless it's a factor. I was at the MMA meeting not too long ago, and I sat in on the pension discussion, and on top of that, because people are living longer, thank heavens, or at least most of us, the actuaries, the National Body of Actuaries, is changing the actuarial tables. And guess what? That's going to cost us probably another 5%, and that's going to come in 2 years. That could be another $50,000. I'm not saying all those things are going to happen. It's possible that we'll earn 8.25% or more. I happen to personally doubt it. I don't think it's conservative to continue to use 8.25%. But putting that aside, and the point I'm trying to make, and I appreciate your patience in this, is that we should understand that there are forces at work that are going to create a real problem or a potential problem that's very expensive for this town. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bowen?
Well, I had a question for Mr. Paulson. You know, in the change of the CalPERS rate, did you factor in the collapse of the Columbus Center real estate deal in that, or did that have any effect on the reduction in the rate?
That's a good question. I don't know. But again, they have, I don't know, pick a number. They have trillions of, I don't know that they have trillions, but they have certainly multi-billion dollars of assets. And they tried earlier in the year, last year, to go from 7.75 to 7.5, and they met resistance at the town level and the city level in California for the same reason we'd meet resistance here when Plymouth, and that's why Plymouth County is unwilling to change, because they realized, they came back to the towns and cities and said, well, guess what? We're going to charge you an extra $50,000 a year apiece. And by the way, there's another 50,000 behind that and another 50 behind that. They would meet resistance. It's a good question. I don't have an answer to it.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Chairman. Do you have questions? Any other questions? Mr. Sullivan, the Board of Selectmen, any questions? Mr. Andrews? Mr. Sullivan, if you continue, please. Thank you.
And I will move on to the expenses portion, if I will. And for my purposes, I'm going to stay in the column that's labeled Administration FY 2013 Budget Scenario.
Mr. Chair, I would like to take Mrs. Winslow's recommendation at this point and jump right to the biggest number, the school number. The rest we can deal with later, rather than go down the page.
Okay.
Let's not be hindered by how the page is printed. Let's talk about the biggest number, the schools.
Mr. Sullivan, can you rotate your plan to accommodate that?
I can wrap
Proceed.
myself around that one. So we go to, and this is on page 5 of 6. Under the education line, you'll see local schools. We'll have the FY12 budget, which was $25,390,794 for net school spending, and $1.341652 for the non-net school spending. That budget on the net side, I believe, was supplemented by the health care holiday of approximately $900,000, or I believe. So when we first started out in this year, we had gone to level funding the school to the budget pre-healthcare holiday, which would have drastically lowered them. I don't have a copy of the 12-15 budget in front of me, but that would have, I'm sure you'll hear what's going to go on to bring them just to level funded, but that would have been very harsh on them. This current budget that I have in here is approximately $388,000 less than what level funding them to FY12 would be. And again, the difference between the level funding and the and what was voted in, there's a difference there as well, but That's the main one that I have from our purview right now, and they are correct. If we're going towards town meeting, we will have to take the school committee budget number on there, and how we would close that gap would have to be a work of everybody in this room.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Sullivan and maybe appropriately the school superintendent. I know that the net school spending and the non-net school spending portion of this budget here is the town's contribution. But what is your actual total budget for the year when you consider all of your revenues? This is just only the town's contribution, is that correct?
This is what is voted at town meeting for expenditures from the LEA budget.
Okay, so my question to you, Mr. Superintendent, would be, are there additional revenues that the town, that the school department receives that inflate this number substantially? So is the actual cost more in the $30 million range, the actual revenues that you receive?
The actual expenditures counting grants and revolving accounts is larger, yes.
Okay, do you have that number?
No.
Can we have that number?
Absolutely.
I think it's worth having it for discussion purposes, because in my opinion these numbers don't reflect the actual cost to run the school department or the schools.
Just as Mr. Sullivan took out of this budget funds that were offsets, the revenue that comes in are offsets through certain other accounts, like kindergarten revolving account. That is not extra revenue to be spent for the school department. It needs to be spent on that program only.
I'm just looking for a total number.
The number to look at is $2.4 million less than what we need to operate the schools.
On the town side. You're asking, the 2.4 million is the difference between what you're asking for the town and what you say that the school needs to operate. But what I'm saying to you is, I think that the number that the schools actually receive, both in revenue and the amount that they spend, is actually greater than those two numbers combined, and that's the number I'm looking for.
And I think then we need an apples to apples, so that all the other revolving accounts that the town has also has to be listed.
I think that I've been asking for that for quite a while, Mr. Superintendent.
Mr. Begley, did you have your hand up? Okay.
As usual, right? Superintendent Rabinovitz, let me ask you, is there any increase in grant monies coming?
Excuse me?
Do you anticipate any increase in grant monies from year to year? Increase?
This year, no. We will have less grant money.
Does that possibly, I understand you're looking for a total number, but what we're looking at is it's not like there's going to be more money on top of whatever the town puts in compared to prior years.
I understand that, Mr. Chairman, through you. Mr. Heath, I do understand that. I'd just like to have the total number. I'd like to have the entire picture.
Mr. McDonald?
There's actually three numbers. No, leave it off, please. Three numbers that are important to me, anyway. I mean, I'm looking at one. This is the town side. This is the school side. Obviously, big difference. But there's another one called minimum funding, and I think that number, however the formula, and I know it's a difficult formula to calculate, but that is another number we need to throw in this equation, because regardless of what you say or what the town says, there is a minimum number that has to be met. It could be lower or it could be higher than the town's number. I don't know the answer to that, but somewhere along the line somebody needs to know the answer, because that is the bottom line that the town can fund the school.
If I may, if you look at the document that Derek provided with state aid, and you go to page 6.
I have so many.
And if you
okay.
So page 6, top of the page, last line, fiscal 12, and you look under required net school spending, and you'll see a number for 12 of $30,125,210,000. So that's $30,125,218.
I don't know that they're the same thing we're looking at here, is it?
But that is the number that you've been asking for. That is the minimum net school spending number. Now, the way you get there is that you take the number that is in the LEA budget and you add in-kind costs, which are the costs for health insurance and other town expenses that are for the school department, like unemployment, like insurance, and other things. So, and that is a negotiated number that it comes out between usually the town administrator and myself, or between the accountants and the business manager at the end of a process. So that is the number that you're asking for.
Wow.
And for a minimum. And Derek hit a very important point. If you look at the town's contribution, which is required by state law, it went up substantially this year. So the number that it went up, I believe, if we look at that, was from $17,518,000 to $17,900,000. So there is a approximately $400,000 increase in what the town needs to spend. So in budgeting, when we look at what is required and that the number that was put into the budget went backwards, we're not going to meet minimum net funding. And all of the extra revenue that was asked about has no effect on this number.
Wow. So
oh,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, someone had their hand up, but if you aren't finished, you had the floor.
Yeah, I'll finish for now.
Okay, Mrs. Winslow.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, Dr. Rabinovich, let's put this in a manner that the average person can understand. What the $30 million minimum net school spending, that's before any in-kind expenses. Do you know?
No, I'm sorry.
That's okay, I'm sorry. Right, but that's what I meant. Okay. So what is the number, either you or Mr. Sullivan, that the town is currently, just a guesstimate, spending on in-kind?
This school year, approximately $4 million.
So if I take that 30 million, and granted I'm not good at math in my head, we're down to 26 million roughly.
That's right, and that is just for net school spending.
I'm clear on that piece of it. I just want to make sure that I understand what the number is that we're looking at in terms of what our requirement is per the statute. So it's roughly 26 million, and the town administrator's budget is inclusive of $26,344,671.
No, ma'am.
No.
The
This is
number
what I'm
that
trying
you-
to get at.
All right. The number that you just read includes both net school spending and non-net school spending.
Okay.
Transportation is non-net school spending and doesn't count towards the net school spending number.
So it's actually $25,003,019 is what the town, in its proposed budget, currently has budgeted.
No, it's $25,003,003, I believe. Oh, I'm sorry, $25,003,000.
Okay.
Is the number that's allocated in this budget.
So essentially, under the statute for minimum net school spending, the town side budget is short $1 million.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. McDonald.
Turn this into a let's go out and pick it or whatever it is. But there's two problems here that I'm trying to deal with. One is, and I've had a couple conversations with Mr. Sweat, and we have a state that's putting down mandating curriculum, mandating programs, and they're not funding them. The formula is out of whack. And so the one avenue to pursue, maybe not just from our town standpoint, but other town standpoint, is some sort of a class action against the state for them to change their formula or to come forth with however they want to do a different formula. So that's one.
Point of information, they don't need to change the formula, they just need
I'm
to
sorry.
honor the formula.
You're right. My fault. My bad. The other side of this is that we're not really talking about the warrant now, but we have several debt exclusions on there because we're obviously facing a crisis here. So I don't know what to tell you. We've had a year since last year to look at these numbers. Not these numbers, but in general, we knew this was coming. We also, and I don't know how many of the selectmen have seen it, have you seen the 5-year plan? The 5-year plan shows a $6.8 million structural deficit over the next 5 years, and I think there's a calculation error in there, and it's a little higher. We can't wait till a month before town meeting to sit down and talk about these things. We need to be physically responsible because we got issues, and they're not going to get any better. The school side has to be dealt with on a higher level than we're sitting here, and also on our level as well. But somewhere along the line, we don't have any more revenue. I mean, it's as simple as that. We either have to adjust our expenses or increase our revenue. There's just two ways to do this thing, and people can say, I don't want to vote for debt exclusion, or people can say, I will vote for debt exclusion. The reality is you get what you pay for, and we're going to have to face that reality very, very shortly, within a month. We're going to get what we pay for.
Mr. Andrews?
Mr. Chairman, just 2 points of clarification. One on in-kind, because I think it's important that not only, Member Winslow made an excellent point. The numbers that we will negotiate as we got better and caught up with the number of the collective bargaining agreements, those new numbers need to be factored into the labor rates for the work that we've done, the insurance rates, the cost of workers' compensation, unemployment. All of that gets factored into a negotiated rate. So it could be north of $4 million. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Superintendent. So, if I might.
That's correct.
Okay. So that's a key point. I'm not trying to short the school district because we're trying to come to some understanding in a coordinated way going into town meeting. The second element of it is that you're absolutely correct. We got through a bridge period between fiscal 2012 and 2013 with the healthcare holiday that has been certified through the fiscal 2011 audit by our outside independent auditors of Powers and Sullivan, and there is a process by which we are going forward with that as we speak. So we need to know that going forward that extra 900 and change is part of a plan that that we need to make up some significant ground with regard to that, not only on the school side but on the town side. So we all knew this going into it. It was talked about on the town meeting floor. Some people liked the plan, some people didn't like the plan. The fact of the matter is that we've had a period of time to deal with it, knowing that we are facing very difficult economic times, not only nationally, regionally, statewide, locally. And this is just not the town of Wareham. All cities and towns are facing what we're facing here today. So we are trying to bridge those gaps as it relates to what the school district needs to function and what the town needs to function. And it's to Mr. McDonald's point that, yes, we need to have a coordinated plan, but once again, that in-kind will be negotiated because we're fronting everything. It's almost like a train. We're fueling the engine to keep running because we're paying all the upfront costs for all the employees. Significant part of that are the 300-plus individuals on the school side, and then the town needs to make itself whole going forward with regards to the negotiated number for the in-kind. So I just want to make that clear because it's a bifurcated process, not one that I would recommend if we had to do it all over again, but one that has been in place for many, many years, Mr. Superintendent. So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, that has been the way.
No, you're not wrong, but if I may, I'm afraid that we're starting off with a false assumption. By looking at minimum net spending number, that is not an adequate number. You started off explaining that the health care number that they put into that formula was back in 1993. Everyone knows healthcare has grown double digits yearly. So all the money that was supposed to be going towards education has been going towards that in-kind number because health insurance costs have gone up. We have changed our population of teachers over the last 8 to 10 years, where now at least 50% of them are within their first 9 years. And by contract, they get increases each year, which is called a step increase. So that it saves you money when you hire a newer person rather than somebody that's retired, but then it starts going up. And if your budget doesn't go up, what happens is you need to start scaling back. Last year, we had a similar issue where the school department came in asking for a needs-based budget of what was needed. By the end of the process, we had to scale it back and make cuts. There were 8 teachers that got cut from the middle school to get, even with the extra $900,000 that came in from healthcare, we still cut employees only on the school side. To ask us to now come back to level funded again and have 20 people cut is going to make an educational system that we will not be proud of. Will it be minimum? Yes. I don't think that's what we want for our children. So that's why we're here, and we can look at all the numbers and we can ask. But the bottom line of this that we need to talk about is there a way? Now, we added articles to town meeting because our fear was that we couldn't get above a certain number and that we were going to have an inadequate budget. So what I'm looking for is for somebody to say, we understand we don't like to raise taxes, we don't like debt exclusions, we don't like overrides, but perhaps we need it because of the dire straits that we're in. And if nobody is going to say that, then in my mind, nobody is stepping up to the plate and being a leader in this town.
Wow, that's exciting.
Mrs. Brunt?
Look, folks.
Yes,
Excuse
it
me,
is.
excuse me.
Somebody has to say it.
Excuse me.
Look.
And I represent 3,000 students who are going to be affected. So I think it does have to be said.
Okay, I think Mrs. Brunt, you have the floor.
Look, folks, what's it going to cost the taxpayers? If it's $2 million, how much is it going to cost? How much is it going to cost us per person? A rough estimate. Has anybody got any idea what it's going to cost? The average taxpayer is paying, say, $3,000, $3,400, or whatever. How much extra is it going to cost these folks? This is what they need to know. If they're going to have it.
Mr. McDonald?
Before we get to that point, I need to know, I guess, and maybe everybody here needs to know, what do we lose if we don't fund it at the level, whatever, you want to start at the 27, 28 million, what happens as we go down? What do we lose? Because I think it's critical for people to understand from a parental standpoint. I'm a parent, and I'm also a taxpayer, but I need to know what we lose if we don't fund at this level, what we lose if we don't fund at that level, because I got a daughter in that school, and I want her to get the best education, and I want everybody's child to get the best education they can get. Now, granted, I realize we only have limited dollars, but somewhere along the line, there has to be a point where we all say, we can't afford to lose this. Do you understand what I'm saying? We get to the point where we're saying, you know, we lost the jacuzzi or something. But we're talking about losing educators. We're talking about losing transportation. We're talking about losing programs that I think are important for our children. We're talking about a curriculum change that we can't even afford to fund. We need to know what we're going to lose if we don't put the money forth.
Mr. Sweat?
And I know our superintendent is prepared to speak to that, but before he does so, I'd like the indulgence of the people in this room. I'd like to say a couple of things and put something in perspective, and at the risk of doing something radical, suggesting a few facts. I know one person's facts or another person's, errors. But I'm going to just simply take numbers that are in the public record. But before I do that, I'd like to say ask a philosophical question. There are some communities in this Commonwealth that when the school committee, 5 elected officials, go through a very transparent budget process, which I have been a party to, and I know how transparent it is, and I know how many opportunities citizens and everybody in this room have had to participate in that process, that when that process is concluded, in some communities, it is literally incorporated into the budget, and they try to figure out, as a community, how to meet the needs of the schools. I'll call that, if you will, one extreme, okay? Because let's face it, it takes a lot of resources to do that, okay? But that is the attitude, I guarantee you, of some communities in this Commonwealth. That they respect the elected officials, and they simply incorporate that into the budget, and then they figure out as a town and city how they can get that dollars for the schools. Another extreme is they don't care what the school committee votes. They don't care what the dollar figure is. They have a predetermined amount of money in mind to give to the schools, and they incorporate that into the budget. And then there is a theoretical process to get to the lowest possible number that they can get to give to the schools. I'll call that another extreme. What I was hoping to find this morning is, well, I guess I'm going to find out what type of community we have, or at least what kind of leadership we have within this community. And do I expect it to be either extreme? No, because we're not a very wealthy community, but I also think we're a community that cares about education. So I was hoping to find something in the middle that says we want to do the best possible thing for our children, but we also want to do the best possible thing in terms of minimizing the impact on our taxpayers. To me, either extreme is probably not appropriate given the financial condition of this town. And I don't advocate either extreme. I advocate something in the middle. A couple of facts, and then I will be happy to yield the floor. I think it's really important to understand the problem. If we simply take publicly available documents, our warrant articles, and by the way, Mike, I have the answer to the question right here in front of me about the dollars that are available to the schools above and beyond the 25 million or whatever the number is, okay? The problem is there's dollar-for-dollar expenditures associated with all those dollars, and every grant that we get is added in assets to our instruction, to our teachers, to our educators, to benefit our children. So while it's a significant number, unfortunately a declining number, there's a dollar-for-dollar expenditure associated with the revenue, so it doesn't really help the problem. But I'll be glad to share that with you. In 2001, net school spending, the money the town meeting approved, was $20,890,000. In 2012, I haven't included 2013 for obvious reasons, because we don't know what that number is going to be. The number was $25,390,794. A simple financial calculation, which Excel does just like that, it calculates the compounded annual growth rate, CAGR for those financial people in the room, so that you can have a sense of just what kind of annual growth does that represent. 1.8%, ladies and gentlemen. If we were talking about the federal government growing, the GDP growing at 1.8%, we'd be saying, gee, folks, that's kind of anemic. We got to do better than that if we want to have full employment, et cetera, et cetera. 1.8% is what this town has been, the growth rate for education spending in this town for the last 12 years. By the way, transportation, 1.2% compounded annual growth rate. By the way, this town, under Mr. Andrews' leadership and several other town administrators, 1.5% for the department spending. Okay? This isn't an analysis. This isn't some complicated thing. This is simply taking the numbers that are in our warrants and comparing them over the last 12 years. Nothing fancy about this. These really are, ladies and gentlemen, facts. So, how do we get in this mess if our town administrators and our educators have all been financially prudent about spending? I want to repeat those numbers for the people listening. 1.8% for education, 1.5% for the town government department spending. Obviously, that doesn't include medical insurance. I'll get to that. I'm talking about controllable spending. And 1.2% for transportation. How do we get into that mess? By the way, it's not really a revenue problem in terms of controllable revenue in this town. Revenue has actually grown using the same exact formula, the same exact numbers, okay, from town meeting warrants, no hidden calculations. Revenue has grown 4.5%. Let me make sure I'm looking at that number correctly. Yes, 4.5%. That's a pretty respectable number when you think about it. Spending has been less than 2%. Revenue has grown 5%. Why aren't we in Fat City? Well, the problem is, of course, that town property tax revenue, okay, is in fact only a small piece of what we get. And in fact, as Derek has alluded to in his prior conversations, our state aid has actually shrunk by about 1%. Now, don't let these small numbers confuse you. If you shrink even 1% over a 12-year period, that actually turns out to be a lot of money in absolute dollars when you're talking about starting with a big number. So I could go on and talking about numbers, but those are facts, ladies and gentlemen. So where are, to Donna's point, where's the problem? Employee benefits, 6.8% compounded annual growth. Ladies and gentlemen, that is, you can literally take that number and divide the spending, say 1.5%, that schools and towns and things like that, and literally say it's been growing about 4 times faster than our regular spending. Other fixed costs, mostly insurance, a relatively small absolute number, but if you have to pay it in absolute dollars, it's still hundreds of thousands, 5.4%. State offsets, yes, they give, that's shrinking by about 1%, but they taketh away. Those state offsets are growing 6.1%. I did another little calculation. All I said was, if those 3 categories had simply grown at the rate of our revenue, not at the rate of our spending, that would have been too much to ask. Our rate of our revenue, which is 4.5% over those 12 years, how much would we have saved for this in fiscal year 12? $2.366 million is what we would have had more to spend in fiscal year 12 if those 3 categories had only grown by the rate of our revenue, which is 4.5%. If they'd grown at the rate of our spending, we would be rolling in money. But we're not, and they're not. So those are facts. I think we could spend every Saturday morning until town meeting and then some and debate whether it's fair to anybody, especially the taxpayers of this town. It's not. But last time I checked, there wasn't somebody in charge of fairness. It just is. This is a reality check. So, I want to point out one more thing, which I will admit is a particular annoyance to me. And that is how unfairly we treat this school district compared to another school district far, far smaller. It's called Upper Cape. Now, I repeat, and I'll say it at the beginning, and I will say it at the end of my comment. They do a great job educating children. They also select them based on academic performance, based on behavior, based on attendance. So they get good kids. By the way, we have great kids here too. But we also take all comers. So we have some kids that really don't want to be here, and that's really difficult. They are growing, drum roll. Let's compare that to 1.8% for education in this town. They are growing 4.9% over that same 12-year period. We would be saving hundreds of thousands of dollars, specifically about $600,000 a year in our budget for FY12, forget about FY13, if we simply had grown their budget at the same rate that we grew education spending in this town. I repeat, they do a great job. This isn't about the quality of what they do. This is about how much it's costing. Now, I have a feeling that Ellen is sitting over there. Don't want to read Ellen's mind, but she's going to say, and has said before, to her credit, I won't put words in your mouth, but you'll like these words.
Stick to the.
I won't sticking. The number of students that we're educating has dropped in this town. And the number of students in Upper Cape, believe it or not, over that 12 years has also dropped. So I took this analysis and I said, how about if we do it on a per student basis? This wasn't an insult, Ellen. It was, I know you think critically, and that's a good thing. Please, trust me. So I did the same analysis on a cost per student, per Wareham student. By the way, back in 2001, they were educating about 240 some odd Wareham students. Today, it's down to 215 as of January of this year, okay? So they're dropped too. But their cost per student is still, their growth in cost per student is rising 5.9%, rising, but ours, if we take our cost per student, is also rising 3.5%. Cost per student, okay? Obviously, fixed costs means that when you lose a student, it's hard to compensate completely 100%. My point is, it's still significantly, maybe 1.5, more than 1.5%, more than 50% greater growth at Upper Cape. It is unconscionable that since we take all comers, we do create things like the cooperative school, West Wareham Academy, et cetera, to try and accommodate all kids in the best possible education environment. We don't screen anybody. They screen completely, and we're still funding them at a rate that makes no sense to me at all. It's almost immoral the way we treat our children here compared to the way we treat people across the bridge. I will tell you, I'm finished talking for the moment, but I feel really strongly about the disparity in financial terms between the way we treat our kids here and the way we treat the kids across the bridge. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to quickly say that I would be hard-pressed to believe that anybody in this room didn't place a high value on education. I know I do. And I feel particularly strongly about the Wareham Public Schools. I think that we owe our children the best we can give them. I don't have a pony in that race. Doesn't benefit me in any way, shape, or form. My daughter is not in this district, but I think we owe it to our kids. However, the reality of the fiscal challenges that we face, declining state aid, increasing costs, have to be dealt with. And unfortunately, we have difficult choices to make. If the community chooses to vote, for overrides and debt exclusions, that's something I think they should have a say in. It shouldn't be Kara's decision. But in this economic climate, I find it hard to believe that those questions would be successful today. So we have to plan for what we're going to do and how we're going to educate the kids and how we're going to provide the services, quite frankly, to the community. Because while some services may not necessarily be a mandate or something we have to do, we have a moral and ethical obligation to our community also. The people in this room have got to collectively find a way to meet so many competing needs and so many important needs without taking away from one to give to another. That's the real challenge here today. I don't think any of us, and I want to direct this comment to you, Dr. Rabinovich, I don't think anybody in this room does not value education. That if we had the ability, that we would be more than happy to spend as much as we possibly could on every child in our district. but we have to deal with the hand that we've been dealt. And that's not going to be a pleasant conversation for any of us. And there aren't going to be easy decisions. But we got to make them. It's time for us to put our big boy pants on and make decisions. And that's what I came here to do today. And so far, we've talked about everything but how are we going to bridge a $2+ million gap. And I'm hoping Mr. Sullivan has those answers because it's already past 11.
Excuse me. Okay, Mrs. Begley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, certainly, you'll be relieved to hear, Mr. Sullivan, that it's not all on you. That's what we have these boards for. That's what we have town meeting for. That's why we have an elected school committee. We have an elected board of selectmen. And yes, I want to address, I think philosophically, Mr. Sweat, that you're right about Upper Cape. However, we do not have a choice with how their budget, how we have to pay into that budget. The majority of the towns are going to vote, whoa, look, Wareham has to pay a bigger piece of the pie. They vote for us to pay a bigger piece of the pie, and that's exactly what happens. I represent, and to the comment about being a leader, I was elected to represent over 44,000 residents in the summer, 20,000 plus. There's 3,000 children in the school system, and yes, that number has been decreasing over the last few years to the tune of about 600 children. We are obligated for town services. Not only are we obligated to supply minimum town services, but one of our major attractions is tourism. So the less we do, the fewer services that we provide. I mean, municipal maintenance, we've all heard how, and it's a wonderful thing, that we've got the litter mob and that citizens are getting involved because it is too much for the number of people that we have employed by municipal services. We have a $2.4 million gap in this budget. There has to be cuts somewhere. We know that. We have, just like the Finance Committee, I mean, you guys are numbers people. It all boils down to, we have this much coming in and this much going out. And if going out is higher than what's coming in, we've got a problem. Do I think that raising taxes is the answer? Not necessarily. Do I think cutting everything, maybe it's going to have to be a combination of the two. However, until I see that, we have to come together on this. I think that it's counterproductive to have this be the school budget versus the town budget. But the town budget, please, people at home, note the town budget is for everybody in town. It's for everyone. So if we are going to have to do layoffs here in town, then those are the parents of the children that attend the school system. We don't have a whole lot of wiggle room in this budget, I understand it. And some may think that the economy is improving, and I absolutely disagree with that comment. We're almost at $4 a gallon for gas. It's absolutely ridiculous. 12-gallon tank, $50 to fill. That I'm seeing reflected in groceries. I'm seeing reflected in all goods and services. So this is only going to get worse. Absolutely, I agree. But I think that if cuts need to be made, it has to be made evenly.
Bonnie.
Hi. Is it on? There are two columns of numbers here, okay? And we're only dealing with one. Personally, I came here today to roll up my sleeves and try to find a solution to this problem. And I would appreciate if we could get back to Derek's presentation of what these numbers really mean. Because in column one, which is, doesn't even take into account the $2.4 million difference with the school department, there are huge cuts to this budget. Huge cuts to departments that I don't think are even realistic. How can we function in those departments with these sorts of cuts? I would like the public to understand what those cuts mean right off the bat, before we even get to a $2.4 million difference with the school department.
Okay, Mr. Andrews.
Mr. Chairman, Bonnie makes a salient point. So Derek, maybe we can roll through this, but one matter for housekeeping, because we had been asking for, and just recently received, I think on Thursday, a release of some of the overlay dollars that were set aside. Is that included in this? Did we already integrate that 150?
I did integrate that in
We
here.
did integrate it?
Yes.
Okay. Because some of those dollars went back to fiscal 2004. So as a matter of housekeeping, just so that the general public and everybody around this table understands, those are dollars that were set aside in the town's overlay account relative to pellet tax board issues that has now been released. And that should become a regular cycle, so that if we have cases that are settled or matters that have been resolved, those dollars should come back to the town to mitigate any of the deficits that we might have going forward. But Derek, maybe you could take us through what I think, through you, Mr. Chairman, what Bonnie had suggested, because I think people need to understand what's already on the table for cuts, because there will be people leaving town hall on the municipal side and on the school side as to what we have right here in front of us. Is that correct?
Just point of information. At the same time, we also do have a document that we can pass out with a list of the school side budgets. And so as we're going through, then the kind folks here can take a look on both sides of what the proposed cuts are. Thank you.
Okay, Derek, you want to continue?
So we'll go on the general government side, and if we turn to page 5 of 6, I'll actually start off at the bottom, and on the administration column, not the bottom, excuse me, the bottom of the general government side, which is actually page 5 of 6. You'll see there'll be the library, historical district, historical committee, and then you'll see departmental wages, expenses and capital, and general government departmental. We have cut from the departmental wages 422,000, roughly 423,000. And expenses, although it looks small, only $4,721, it's actually much larger, because with such items as fuel, if we've had a 25% increase, and let's say
Excuse me, Derek. Where are we in what's column here?
Page 5 of 6,
What column?
administration, FY 213 budget, the third column. So if a department that relies heavily on gasoline, such as the police department, if they have a $150,000 fuel budget last year, and that's going up by 25%, that's an additional $45,000. And I guess we can't tell them to not drive their cars around or patrol. So that's also when we factor in with municipal maintenance, their costs as well. The costs for heating the buildings and such. That's where the expenses don't look like they've really been cut that much. But actually, if you went back, and we just had too many columns, I took it out. You'd see that the departmental request and what we've actually put in here is drastically different by I believe it's $1.5 million altogether from the town side. But the number one number is that we've cut a total of $427,620 from the town side budgets. And how we've accomplished that is, number one you'll see on here is the lifeguard program is not being funded in this budget. And that would be page.
It's 4.
Page 4. So if you go page 4 of 6, you'll see that's not being funded. Some of the positions that are currently open, we're not only not filling them, but we're not funding those positions. We struck any of the positions that would be considered new, such as I believe the personnel services director. That was something that many of the boards had asked us to bring back. We're not going to fund that position. All told, this represents a reduction of as of right now, 4.5 full-time employees, or full-time employee equivalents. What it also represents is the rest of the employees, a 3.75% reduction on their salaries. That's the employees that will still be working here, a 3.75% reduction in their salaries.
Can I just ask a question of Mr. Sullivan?
Could we wait until he finishes and then?
Well, it's just to elaborate on that, just the reduction in salaries, these are union employees?
Union, so they will have to be negotiated, which may mean that if the unions do not agree to those cuts, it would turn into layoffs on there. And a point on there is the average cost of one of our employees, the average salary that's non-departmental head, is $37,881. So for roughly every $95,000 that we'll cut is 2.5 positions, or the equivalent of 2.5 full-time positions. So that's really a number that you can keep in mind to try and track.
That math makes sense, but then you have the offsetting increased expense of unemployment that you wouldn't have if you simply decrease their salary, correct?
Correct. The unemployment, our cost would be 36% of their base pay. So
has that been included anywhere in the budget?
That we have increased the unemployment number by $110,000 right now.
Right, but is that based on the assumption that the unions wouldn't accept it and you'd have to turn it into layoffs, or is it based on...
If it turns into layoffs, I'm going to have to increase the unemployment number.
Do you have any idea how much that would be?
If that number would be, I believe it's about I'm going to use round numbers if this is okay for everybody. 250,000. So if we take 38,000 per employees, that right there would be about 6.5. So at 36% of the 38,000, that would be roughly another $90,000.
Or about 3 employees more, just to pay for the unemployment.
Right, you would actually be laying people off to pay for the others' unemployment and getting into that cycle.
Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, Mr. Sullivan, through you to Mr. Sullivan, the lifeguard program, that's kind of it kind of crosses fiscal years, right? Because it starts in June and ends in September. So are you saying that in 8 weeks, when June comes around, there'll be no lifeguard program here, right?
Correct. There'd be no lifeguard program.
So let me ask you this, because this is the kind of stuff that drives people nuts. If there will be no lifeguard program in 8 weeks, why are we paying for advertisements in newspapers for lifeguards?
And I can understand that.
Right? See what I'm saying?
I can see.
Because people want us to scrutinize things, and yet they look in the newspaper and they see lifeguard advertisements, come down and sign up, and then they watch this on Saturday and there is no money for lifeguards. But we're paying the advertisement in the newspaper. I'm sorry?
If I may, Mr. Chair, it's March. I mean, this is new. This is new to me. It's March. So if the budget didn't reflect that the lifeguard program wasn't in there, so but I understand your point. If it was what if the town won the lottery? Then we could have lifeguards, so we'd have to advertise for them. But is this a late development, Mr. Andrews?
Well, if this went out, it probably went out when we had the budget already with the lifeguard.
With the lifeguards
Now
in.
this is a budget that we're working on right now. So if we agree, then it'll be null and void. It'll be over with. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, the point Selectman Holmes is well taken. We have many, many weeks and months to prepare for programs. There are other postings that we just recently put out there with regards to the Council on Aging and other positions in town government. Until we actually saw some of the closer numbers to our revenues, we were proceeding with the lifeguard program, even scale back with respect, Mr. Sullivan, correct me if I'm wrong, cutting out some of the equipment needs and cutting back some of the expenses. So we were trying to go with a scale down plan at the latest point. And then we had to eliminate the program altogether after those postings were put in the newspaper. So that's the explanation. We're trying to move forward on different fronts with the scaled-back program the best we could.
You understand?
Sure, I do understand the point, and it's well taken.
Mr. Brown?
I understand you scale back a lot, but as I said, we all came in here to work, and that this is a summer community, a huge summer community. Did anybody ever think about, instead of buying new cruises, they bought motorcycles for the summertime? I mean, for gas reasons? I mean, things like this we should be thinking about.
Still a cost. I think wait up, Larry, I
Well,
think.
you still have your cruises, but you still...
Excuse me, Bonnie?
I just wanted the public to understand that this is real people that we're talking about. Just for instance, and I don't know if Derek wants to address this directly, but we have something called information technologies, okay? It's a one-man show. This budget doesn't even cover his salary. That means that he is either going to accept a pay cut. I mean, is he willing to do that? This is all subject to negotiations and whether they accept this or not. This is going to mean radical changes for our everyday operations of this town, okay? On top of that, we have advertised for a town accountant, all right, at $90,000 to $95,000 that we can't afford. While we're cutting other people's salaries, this is going to be really interesting. Let's roll up our sleeves and get to it.
Okay, Mr. Andrews?
Mr. Chairman, just on the information technology, Mr. Sullivan, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the part-time position that it was included in the budget. It doesn't impact directly, other than the reduction that you mentioned earlier of a negotiated amount with the union relative to the 3+%. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And also, secondly, I do happen to agree. The Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, and members of the school board did participate in 2 searches. We are in the middle. I've activated the screening committee to look at the resumes that have come in. That hopefully august body will start their work next week. Let's look at the resumes and see what we have. And then otherwise, I would be recommending to the Board of Selectmen that we continue with the current arrangement with Bay State Municipal Accounting, because we are midstream. We need to get to the fiscal further stability of the town with the accounting systems that we have in place if we cannot find a body, if you will. And I do agree with Bonnie. Let's just look at the lines. If you agree with them, let's move ahead, because we have still additional dollars to be reduced from the budget. And once again, those 2 explanations speak to what Bonnie had put forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think Sam was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was passed out, I think, by the school committee a sheet that says reduction for level funding budget. And there are 2 figures. They are 2 totals, a subtotal of $1,009,000 and a cut for level funding of $1,789,000. I'm not exactly sure where those cuts get us. As far, does the $1,789,000 get us down to the administration budget? Is that what you're saying? Or I guess I'm not sure where those cuts get us as far as...
Fair question. The combined cuts, but keep in mind that includes the debt exclusions. And so if they are approved, then we will be able to, for example, purchase some textbooks, technology, et cetera. But the combined cuts gets us to level funding for FY13, meaning the same number as FY12, but that still means we are 300 some odd thousand short of the administration's budget. Does that make sense?
Mr. McDonald?
Through you to Derek. You mentioned that it was 4 full-time equivalents. This budget represents 4 full-time equivalent reductions. A reduction of 4.
And if I may, then the salary would be on top of that, the additional cuts.
So that, I noticed an advertisement in the newspaper for 3 new, I don't know if they're officers or people to work in the communication center at the police. Does that also include this in this budget as well?
Those personnel there, from my understanding, from what...
Mr. Sullivan, 1 second. Mr. Andrews, you want to answer that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a plan that we asked all the department heads, through you, Mr. McDonald, to look at ways that they can save dollars. Right now, currently, we have an officer and a dispatcher sitting in the dispatch room. This plan is to effect, literally, to get that officer out of the dispatch room and to be walking the beat or getting into the police schedule. And so we've been looking at this as a way of efficiency going forward, because we know we can pay a dispatcher a lower rate, and it's within the police department's budget currently. So it's to get the dispatching people to do the dispatching at a lower rate, and to put those, I think it's 2 officers, back on this beat, back on the street.
It doesn't have okay, I see what you're saying. So you're going to be able to hire 3 people, but you're going to put the officers back on the street. So where's the reduction? So my big question is, are the 3 people in the budget for this year?
That's correct.
Okay, they're in the budget for this year.
You are correct, sir.
That's all I really wanted to know.
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Winslow?
I'm just curious as to, and I'm not sure when last time the town has done this, but it's evidenced by this budget and the projections going forward that we can't deliver services in the manner that we've been delivering them. And there are other communities over the past few years who have invested, in some cases small, $25,000, in other cases, larger amounts of money, in consultants that come in and look at what our goals for service delivery is and how we can accomplish that mission with less or by integrating technology. Has there been any discussion through the various committees about conducting some type of study that maybe would long-term save us money with implementing new ways of doing things?
I'll ask Mr. Andrews to address that. I think that would be more of a role of the town administration and department heads as opposed to these committees. Mr. Andrews?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We have something that goes back 10 years and then back 2 years, called the Department of Revenue Management Report, and recommendations made in that report. Not quite specifically to the question of, but we are looking at consolidations and ways to conserve and to bring departments into alignment. I've asked the various department heads through the leadership team to come up with ways to conserve and to be able to work together cooperatively. One aspect of that was when we did activate the lifeguard program, was to get the lifeguards with the police department, with the emergency medical services and harbor master to work more closely together to eliminate some of the overlapping. We also had back over a year ago a strategic plan that was commissioned with graduate students from university that came up with ideas along those lines. So I think that has to be ongoing discussion. I think it's something that works for not only us, but I know the police department is going through a strategic planning process. I know the school district and the library also have gone through similar type of strategic planning. So I welcome that, and I think these bodies welcome that type of work. And it might mean that we have additional support staff that when you put various departments together, their functions and jobs may overlap in certain ways, and we'd have to negotiate impact bargain that on the Chapter 150E with the various bodies. But we are looking at that, and I will bring to the board, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, other ways to get to your point, Member Winslow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Mr. Andrews, there are some projects going on today. We know that, just to mention a few, the assessors department has been working very closely with the inspectional services department to increase the value of the permits that people are buying, right? And there are things of that nature going on. We had a presentation 3 weeks ago at our sewer workshop by Mr. Campina and his team, Mr. Juicy was there as well. He has another one, I think, that we received an email on for maybe next week or the week after Selectmen meeting, where he's out actually looking at technology and things to save money to run the sewer operational plant. So we know that there are ongoing projects. I was just looking at another one here. I just went quick to the Shellfish Harbor Master group because, you know, they're out. We've had Mr. Buckminster in here at several meetings now discussing different programs that he's doing that's increasing revenue in terms of permits in the those moorings and things and farming fields and getting us involved in grants. So we know that several departments are doing that. I don't know. Mr. Rabinovich may want to address, Dr. Rabinovich may want to address some of the stuff that the school department is doing so that people are aware that these projects are going on all sides.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just real quick before the doctor, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, because everybody's seen the copies of the memorandum of understanding with regards to some of the collective bargaining agreements that we've settled. We've got the gimmicks out. Let's be honest about where we've gone. We've got a lot of work to be done going forward, but all but 3 of the collective bargaining agreements that the town have cited certain areas and gimmicks that the Board of Selectmen asked me to get out. Things like sick leave buyback over a certain period of time that somehow migrated its way into our collective bargaining agreements, where employees of the town received a check sometime before Christmas, and that, Mr. Sullivan, correct me if I'm wrong, at one time was close to a $150,000 item. You can see it's been reduced down here because we've got that stuff out of the contracts. Other types of work, consolidating and coordinating holidays. In some cases, we had clerical staff not reporting for duty on certain days and managers going to work, and we're trying to service the general public. To Member Winslow's point, didn't make a lot of sense. So through our collective bargaining agreements, we have already made great strides going forward, and I know the town will go forward with additional items. Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Rabinovich, do you want to address this issue before we move on to the next question?
Do you want to clarify what you're looking for?
Yeah, the question was, you know, what are we doing in terms of projects or resources as a way of reducing costs through different efficiencies, technology, energy, etc.?
Well, we went into a new contract with energy last year, was able to reduce our costs as far as electricity. The weather has cooperated, but before that point, we were involved in a long-term energy management where when the custodians come in, they turn the heat on. Once it reaches a certain temperature, the heating systems are turned off and not turned back on until they need to be, so that we have been continuously reducing the amount of gas used so that we have saved money so that it could go to other parts of the budget. So energy is a big thing. We are looking at, we have something, I don't know if it's going to save at this particular moment, but we have been looking at one-on-one computing with iPads, where instead of buying textbooks for $95, that it's a lot cheaper to get that book online, and that it can be interactive. Unfortunately, not all of the students have devices at home and so forth, so we would have to provide some. So that's a pilot that's going through, and I hope by the end of the year we'll have a recommendation on that as well to save some textbook money.
Thank you. And then Mr. Paulson had his hand up for a question or a comment, and then Mr. Chair, I think we're done with this segment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to come back to something that Jeff mentioned, and it's part of, at least as I see it, it's part of the solution to the problem. It's the problem and part of the solution, as I said, and that is the rapid escalation of benefits over the years. His number was 6.8%. Let's say it's 7% just for round numbers for sake of conversation. And the growth in the school budgets and X costs and the growth in the town budgets is closer to 2%. So you have, on one hand, you have the benefits growing at roughly 3 times the rate and over time, on a trend, if you will, of the other expenses, what we call the controllable expenses. It would seem to me, and just as a suggestion, if I were sitting in your seats, I would go to the unions, I would go to the employees of the town, everybody, and say pretty much the following. And that is, we've got an immediate problem. We've got to save $1 million, pick a figure, and we're asking you, employees, to give up part of your pay today. Because if you don't, what's going to happen, unfortunately, is there will be layoffs. The longer-term solution, Mr. and Ms. Employee, is that your benefits are going to have to be changed, unfortunately, but that's just fact. And that we negotiate very strongly on those terms. If the and explain it to the employees. And I would go further with the employees. I would say if we can, in fact, accomplish a longer-term goal to cut the benefits, what we will do in the future is come back and calculate how much of a cut you took, and we'll recompense you. You will get the money back, hopefully. And I say hopefully, but just to explain to them that they are a part of this. They know they're part of it, and that they're going to have to take a cut if they agree. Now, they may get it back, they may not get it back, but that the primary issue, at least in my mind, is on the benefit side, because that's what Jeff's numbers indicate. It's the benefits where the problem is, and we really have to deal with that, it would seem to me. And this is perhaps the time to do it. Thank you.
Town Administrator.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Paulson makes a very good point. I think some of the options that we have and other towns have already migrated towards this, with respect to closing down on Fridays so that we can turn the heat off on Thursday evening, and getting into a routine where we stay open later on Tuesdays. Many of the cities and towns that I know of that have worked to this point have saved significant dollars, not only utilities, but on personnel. Classifying those, as Mr. Paulson has said, as perhaps a, whatever you want to call it, a furlough period, and saying that if in fact certain revenues in the future go above a certain mark or formula base, that you would be able to return those dollars to the employees. But we have this immediate problem right now. And I also would be remiss if I didn't say that under Chapter 69, Section 21 of the current healthcare statute, we have already negotiated into our collective bargaining agreements reduction in some of the costs relative to inpatient and outpatient care, also increasing copays. So those are, once again, 2 agreements away from being completed. That will have an impact on the health care trust fund. Additionally, what will have impact will be that we have, I've been working with the superintendent on this and the departments, over 100 individuals that have dependents on our health care plan that amounts to a savings of over $400,000 if in fact we can get them to either document that the individuals that are dependents of town employees are legitimately on our plans. We found 2 dead people on our plans, so they weren't getting any additional benefits, but they shouldn't be on our plan. This is mandated by that chapter of that law to be done within 2 years. We initiated it this past summer. We have sent Derek a half-dozen letters to these individuals. Some of them complained about getting documentation to us. It's time that we send them a letter saying you can either put up or, pardon me, shut up as it relates to being on a health care plan, which if you look at this, we had to put $1.4 million back into the healthcare trust just to stay up with the pace of the costs of that particular employee benefit. So that's a significant structural change in that healthcare amount, and those individuals will be receiving a letter hopefully in the next week or so. I've been working with the superintendent because people have to understand that this is the law. You have to provide that documentation, or you're going to have to be taken off the plan. And so that's one of the other benefits that, to Mr. Holmes's point, that we have put in place. But also, once again, some adjustment. If we can close down the heating systems on buildings operations on Thursday evening, particularly in the wintertime, or either stay open for half a day on Friday or close down on Friday and stay open later on Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever you want, that will save us significant dollars on a utility side, and it is an option that we have.
Well, I know we're getting to a lot of questions. Can we stick to the budget, go through the budget, and try to get it done with? So, okay, Bonnie.
I want to ask a specific question here to Derek. I'm looking at reductions in some departments, okay, but I'm looking at an increase in municipal maintenance. Can you explain that for me, please?
You have your page page in
Page 4 of 6.
4?
The number, I'm looking at the worksheets provided as to how many employees we have, et cetera, and this number is quite extensive to the worksheet that I have, so I'd like an explanation there.
We settled union negotiated contracts, and this is the new figure that's on there. So it has gone up with the union negotiated contracts, and their expenses have not been reduced as much due to the fact that we will have to pay for some of the rising gasoline and other costs such as electricity, gas, and utilities. So those would be contracted obligations.
Specifically in the wages department?
Wages and whatever would be in the salary line there.
Mr. Chairman, if I could also, just as a footnote, Bonnie, as well, we did take out some items prior to this that needed to stay in through the contract. That included overtime and some of the automatic increases for when individuals were called in because of emergency or snow. So I believe that's in that number, Mr. Sullivan, as well.
That's correct.
Mr. McDowell?
Well, I was really sure you were going to ask this question, but I waited anyway. If you look at the Council on Aging wages, you're reducing it by almost $97,000. Now, considering the fact that that line item is a relatively small number, you're basically taking out a very large number, so you want to give us a little insight into that one as well?
Yes, part of those wages should not have been considered in the town budget. They're grant employees, so they're paid out of grants. We hadn't paid them out of the town budget, but we'd always put them on there to watch who they are. That's roughly I can't come up with the sum on that. But the other, and I'm not going to specifically name anything or anyone, but there's a position reduction.
Okay.
Want to continue?
I think we've all we've either eyed the lines or gone over them. These cuts have been based on closing town hall on Friday, and that's where it would be extending hours on Tuesday, and that's where really the reduction in the salaries coming from is, if you look at it, it would be 1.5 less hours a week to somebody that would be on a 37.5 hour pay week. So they would work 1.5 less hours. We would close town hall on Friday. So this would all again have to be negotiated, but it would look similar to, let's say, Monday they'd work 8.5 hours, Tuesday a 10-hour day, if you will, to keep it open longer so people don't have to leave work during the day to do whatever services they need to do at town hall. So it may be a benefit to the average citizen. Wednesday work 9 hours and Thursday 8.5 hours. That way the reduction in salary would, if you call it the humanistic approach, would be throughout the entire 52 weeks. So it wouldn't be lump sum hits. Everybody's pay would be affected, but hopefully if that were negotiated and it worked out that way, it would help people to absorb it. Hours.
It's also a 20% reduction in commuting costs.
For me.
Can you tell me why Friday was chosen? Because most of the holidays occur on Mondays. So the holidays would be, say, there's like 10 Mondays a year. So I'm just curious as to why Friday.
If you're right, the holidays do occur on Mondays. So my understanding of it is we're still paying for them on the holidays on those Mondays. So is it in fact a reduction there? I guess I would have to work out a schedule for it. For simple math, for me right now, chose Friday. It was
Okay.
an arbitrary day, really, on there. So.
Mr.
Paulson.
This may be too simplistic as it is, I apologize, but we've got a town meeting coming up in roughly 4 weeks. We've got approximately 20 unions, give or take, and a lot of different issues here supposedly to be negotiated between now and I would guess then being the town meeting. Where do we stand on implementing some of these things or going forward?
Mr. Chairman, first of all, there's 11 collective bargaining units, and one is a two-part collective bargaining unit that relates to the steelworkers, which are the managers, the department heads, and their clerical staff. We have been in negotiations with them. I served notice back in January with regards to ongoing fiscal 2012 negotiations. I would ask members of this board, I know that we need to do this expeditiously, but we could get them in to explain to them the scenarios. It would have to be across the board. I think that's the fairest way to go. It could be a Monday, certainly, to Selectman Begley's point. You know, I think the town needs to just lay it out for them as it relates to what the fiscal circumstances are, and then they have options. But impact bargaining is something that can be done rather quickly, and also give them the opportunity to Member Winslow's point earlier, to keep the level of service, alter some of the schedules and times to save dollars. Once again, we're probably lagging with respect to closure. If you're down and you get a snowstorm and it's in the middle of winter, you can close on Thursday. You save the electricity and you save the cost of bringing in personnel for really Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or whatever you want to call it, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Give them the option to tell us what they think about it. So I think those are 11 conversations. One, again, is a double. So it's you're talking about 10 meetings, and you're talking about asking 10 unions to go back to their members to say, at least on the town side, here's how we feel about this. And we're already at the table with them. They do understand, because I have drawn to their attention already with regards to negotiating fiscal 2012, that we are facing some very serious financial circumstances. And so they understand that already in negotiations for 12, it would be an opportunity to say to them, Mr. Paulson, going forward, here's how 13 looks. So what do you got? What do you think? And give us your best effort back. They could call a meeting, I believe, within, correct me if I'm wrong, attorney, within 48 hours of their membership, and post that meeting and give us an answer back, by the tail end of next week.
Mr. Winslow?
Thank you, Chairman Cruz. Just to go back to Mrs. Begley's question, there are several communities around us that use the closing down a week that was have many of which have been implemented over the budget crisis that everybody's faced over the past few years. And the reason that Friday tends to be chosen is because in the winter, when you shut down the heat on the Thursday, you're saving, and over a holiday weekend, you're saving that one extra day. It's also, as Mr. Andrews said, when you go to the unions, it can also be a positive point for them that during a holiday weekend, it's going to be a 4-day weekend for them. So, but if you were to look at a place like Plymouth or Carver, both of them did experience significant energy savings by using the Friday as opposed to a different day of the week.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Derek, through you to Derek. I'm kind of getting to Mrs. Catulli's point that she's made now 5 or 6 times, right, about the budget, and that's why she's here. I kind of get the sense I'm going backwards. And I think what's missing is an assumptions page, right? So if I'm to understand you, and you can fill in the blanks, this paperwork that you presented today assumes Town Hall is closed 1 extra day a week than it is now. That we have fully negotiated with our 11 or 12 unions 3% reduction in salary, right?
Correct.
And we're assuming all these things are going to happen before July 1st, right? Because that's when the year starts. Are there any other assumptions in here?
it would be that they went with the salary reduction. We're allowed to close town hall on Friday, whether it was the layoffs the other way. And really, there aren't that many large differences. And I think
if all those things happen, and everybody signs off, and we close the doors on Friday, we're still $2.4 million off.
Cool.
If any of those things don't come to fruition, the 2.4 is going up.
Correct.
That's why I feel like I'm going backwards here, because that's a lot to get done and to get people to agree to.
And I think that, if I may, I think that's the great point. Just to even get to this picture right here, it's going to take a lot of effort, and it's going to take hurt or pain, if you will, on there for people that we see every day, all of us here. So.
I wanted people to understand that this isn't a temporary fix. Okay? This is where the budget is. If all of those assumptions that you just listed happen, okay, this is the way Wareham's town government is going to run from this moment forward for the next years or whatever, unless town meeting, the public in general decides that this is not the way they want to live and they want to change how we assess our taxes around here, meaning a 2.5 override. I'm not advocating that. I don't want to pay any more money than anybody else does. But that's going to make the choice as to what the quality of life in Wareham is. We're not the first town who's done it. Other towns have done it and stuck with it. That's the choice we have to give to the people, and that's the choice I wanted them to understand, is this is where town government is going to be even before we get to the school department. I sympathize with their problem too. But those are the reductions that are going to happen even before we deal with another $2.4 million.
Thank you. I guess I didn't fully appreciate this budget. I thought what was going to happen was we were going to see a $2.4 million gap and then kind of make these moves. It's kind of alarming to hear that these moves have already been made, and that's what this budget is based upon. I'd like to just go back to what Bonnie just said, and that's that this is the budget that we're talking about. Before 2.4, the reductions are made. I'd like to find out from the school department what reductions have been made for them to have what they consider their bottom line number. Not this sheet that paints this picture, but I want to know what reductions have been made. And the other point that I'd like to make, and a question to be asked, is Selectman Holmes mentioned the department heads going and kind of taking ownership of their departments and seeing how they could be more efficient, run it more efficiently, bring the costs down. Unfortunately, make it so efficient that we could use fewer folks to perform their duties. And that didn't just happen by accident. It was at Mr. Andrews' direction. So he asked these department heads to take ownership of their departments, and they are investigating these initiatives at his direction. So the question was to Dr. Rabinovich, what by his direction are his department heads, or what initiatives are they all taking other than turning the heat down at night or on Fridays for the weekend? So I want to know, and just those energy savings, which can be significant. Believe me, I have an oil bill. So what initiatives are being taken to run it as efficiently and as tight as possible?
As I said earlier, we had 8 teachers cut at the middle school last year to get to the number that was the number in the budget. Yes, and therefore class sizes at the middle school are running from 27 to 30 children. So in this budget, for me to get to level funded, I now have 21 positions to cut. And so that the elementary schools will get 27 to 30 children. So yes, we have looked at this. We've looked at where we can cut. Managers every day look at things that they don't need to spend. But the difference is that we have 25% of our budget is special needs that we are required to spend. We don't get to make a choice on that. When a child moves in and is a foster child and I need to transport them someplace, we have to pay for it. And we have to educate. We had one child last year move in a placement of $260,000. I didn't have the ability to come back to town meeting and say, increase my budget. I had to use what we had. So we have been cutting. We continuously cut. And it's been probably over the last 6 years that we have been eliminating administration. You know, I used to have a director of food services. We don't have that anymore. I used to have a director of fields and grounds. I don't have it anymore. I had a director of technology. I don't have it anymore. So we have been continuously cutting, getting to a point where now the only cuts left come out of teachers in the classroom. And what's in front of you, if we are at level, is 21 positions. If we go to the 300,000 below, we're probably looking at, I don't know, 28, 29 people. Class sizes will be in the 30s. I mean, that's the reality.
Mr. I just wanted to respond. Can I just respond to Dr. Rabinovich? I understand what you're saying, and I understand that you're giving us a list. Well, the town budget that you're being presented with right now is reflecting the very same list on the town side. What my question was what you consider the minimum amount that you need, which is the $2.4 million gap. Is that where did the increase come from last year? Where did the increase of $2.4 million from last year come from? How is that reflected?
Well, the sheet in front of you shows approximately, I don't know, probably about $1.5 million of the increases that have been cut.
You misunderstand.
For instance, we also had collective bargaining agreements that came that were 3-year agreements. This next year, actually, I feel that we did a decent job at the table because teachers are frozen at their step. They don't move up next year, which would have been another cost of at least $120,000. We were able to get them frozen as part of that. But they did get a 1.5% raise, which is a $180,000 increase in the budget. That's just teachers. If you look at the entire salaried population, which is closer to 18 million, the 1% on that is 180, and then if you put another 90 on that, now we're talking 270, let's call it 300,000 as an increase. That's before you get to, you need another special ed program here, we need to transport somebody there. Curriculum, somebody mentioned curriculum before. The state and the federal government has come out with a brand new, this mass core that we have to implement. Our high school math curriculum has to be changed and is in the process. There are committees meeting to change it between now and next year. As part of that debt exclusion, but it was included in this budget, were textbooks worth about $270,000 because we need to change all of the high school math texts. We have a new English curriculum that was put in K through 12. We needed to change all of the materials for that, as well as a new assessment system where we can have data as part of the RTI that was put in, because we're not achieving where we need to be. It isn't just trying to stay level, it's trying to improve that performance, and that's why some of these increases are there. And without them, we're just not going to we're not going to be able to achieve that. Achievement gap is not going to be able to be closed.
Jeff. The next school committee meeting is March 21st. It is now noon. I had hoped that the superintendent plus Rhonda and myself would be in a position to recommend, well, we will have a discussion about the budget on March 21st. That is on the agenda. The key element of that discussion, hopefully, will be the fact that on January 25th, we voted a budget, which you see reflected in one of Derek's columns. I had hoped that there would be that this discussion would involve a recommendation by the superintendent, supported by Rhonda and myself, for a revision to that number so that it would help the town get to at least more balanced budget, if not a balanced budget. I had hoped that this morning we would get a consensus about what we would do as the political leaders of this town to bring a balanced budget to town meeting. The school committee is prepared to do its part. And even though this has been interesting and maybe even productive conversation, there is some urgency about this whole process. I strongly urge us to recognize what I think many of us have said in different ways, which is, despite the frugality that both the town and the schools have had for over a decade with respect to operating this town, we are still short resources. So, as Bonnie said earlier, we're either going to permanently reduce the scope of services that we provide to the citizens of this town, including to the education of their children, or we're going to have to come up with more revenue. It is literally that simple. We shouldn't be kidding ourselves that we can go through line item after line item after line item and come up with $500,000, let alone $2 million worth of cuts. It's just not possible to do. We need to get serious about the fact that we're either prepared as a group, and I say as a group because I do not believe that if there's essentially a 50-50 split in this room about whether new revenues should be advocated for on town meeting. We come to town meeting with a 50-50 split. The average citizen is going to say, well, if they can't decide, then I'm sure as hell not going to pay any extra taxes. That's a given. But if there is consensus in this room that some number of extra dollars needs to be generated in revenue, combined with some amount of cuts, and that we all agree on that, then I think town meeting will say, gee, they have consensus, they know more than I do, they've been participating in this process, maybe I should get behind it. But if we're split, there is no way that I, as an average citizen, would say, fine, raise my taxes. It's just not going to happen. So I don't know how we're going to use the rest of this meeting, but we've got to get on the same page, because it is not going to be the 11th and a half hour, the hour before town meeting, that I'm going to recommend it to my school committee that we join in some process to start cutting an hour before town meeting.
Yeah, I think, Don?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Mike,
So let me suggest this, because I understand where you're going, and this is how I feel because, well, I'm tired. If you start with the 25 million, 25.003 that the town is got it in their side of the budget. If you just start with that number now, take into consideration what. Well, no. I'm from the South. We know how to hunker down and negotiate. But let's 25 million. Let's just take that number. That's the town's number. Then take from that, go forward and say, okay, this is how much we have out there asking for debt exclusion, which I think some of the things are very, very important. Then add in the amount of the override, and at that point in time, am I getting close to the number you're looking for, is what I'm saying. You got to start somewhere.
I don't want to speak for, certainly not the rest of my committee, and not even for these two people next to me. But I would say that if the debt exclusions and the override were supported by this room, we'd be getting really close, and we'd be there. But the problem is that I don't know that there's support for all those things in this room, and if there isn't that support, then it isn't going to be passed even at town meeting, let alone the ballot, And therefore, for me to get behind something when there isn't even support in this room for what you're describing makes no sense. It's not rational on my part.
That's my point. We're at the point where now we're down to let's figure out if we have the support, because that 2025 is the starting point, is what we're saying, because that's a town cutting everything they can possibly, well, not everything, but as much as they could possibly stand out of their budget, and that's the number they can come up with. So now the rest of the money's got to come from somewhere, and the only place it's either going to come from is the lottery. That's a suggestion, not a good one, but it still is. So it's got to come from the citizens at this point. We're not going to win a lawsuit in the next month with the state to fix their formula, and I'm pretty sure Governor Patrick doesn't have that extra cash in his pocket. So it's got to come from us, the citizens. So what you're asking us to do is either support the debt exclusions and the override, or not support them. And at that point, you're going to make a decision to do what? Leave your number in the budget?
It is a great question. We came prepared to seriously consider, and I hesitate to say this, so I'm speaking only for myself. I think we came prepared to seriously consider level funding with last year, plus support for the override and debt exclusions from these bodies. Okay? If we came out of this room with that, there's no guarantee what would happen as a result of that.
No doubt.
Okay? But we can't ask anything more of this room than that. Okay? We can't. And so, speaking for myself, I would think that was setting the right tone for how we valued both the town and the education in this community. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. And as far as I'm concerned, from the debt exclusion, I understand. I've read them. We should have had this conversation a week ago, a month ago, whatever. We should have had this conversation a week ago, because now you have in the budget, I don't know if you put a number in on the override. But
yes, we have. But let me add one more element to that. If all of the debt exclusions and the override were defeated, we are prepared to do this, because these are the consequences associated with that. Which means, of course, that since this body has no control over what the voters decide, nor should we, okay? If the voters decide, they decide, and we have to honor that decision, okay? Then these are the consequences, just as Derek has outlined the consequences for the town side. We're prepared to do that because the citizens have a right to make those decisions. But it's a question of what this body supports and advocates as to whether we feel we should change the number so radically, in my mind.
So we're at the point where now we're cutting bait. I mean, this is it.
Yes.
Either we support it or we don't support it, and then we go to lunch, right? I mean, that's really what we're down to, because
I got to go. I got to go to another meeting, but that's another story.
There's no negotiation at this point, past the point of whether or not we support it or not, because the town's done their part as far as. And again, I'm not saying that they've done everything they could do or they've done more than they could do. I'm just saying they've done their part to try to get to this number. So my problem with the override, and this is a serious problem, is if somebody came in and said, you know what, I would support an override, but I wouldn't support it to that level, and it's a significant dollar change from what you have on the override in the warrant, you can't do it, because...
No, it's not. No, I'm not advocating increasing it.
No, what I'm saying is the number that you have in there, if we decide, if not we, but if the people decide that that's just too high, there's a chance you might not be able to change it, because once an article's in there, if it's a significant change in the dollar amount, you can't reduce it.
I believe it just says a sum of money.
Okay,
Yeah.
There's no dollar. That's what I asked about the dollar figure.
The motion will obviously include the sum.
Okay. Right, and that's going to come from where?
Excuse me?
That number that's going to be in there is...
Well, actually,
that's where
it
I'm
seems
at.
to me that number should come out of this meeting.
Okay, then here we are. This is
Because I can't ask you or anybody else in this room to support a sum of money. What does that mean?
So all you need, okay, so here's where we're at. Debt exclusion, lay out the dollar amounts, what they're for, and then you're down to the override.
Right,
Bingo.
but in all candor, I don't see I don't see why that override or debt exclusion process should exclude the town. I mean, the town is suffering too. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but they're not asking for one. Do you understand what I'm saying?
They may or may not be asking for one. If they're not, they're not. Okay? But my point is they're suffering, and it seems to me people should there should be shared pain in this process. That's all I'm saying. But if the town doesn't want to take part in that process, that's not my call. I don't represent.
I think Mike is next. Go ahead, Mike.
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I actually have a question for Dr. Rabinovich, just because I'm a little bit clear on this cut for level funding for the net school spending number, or maybe Jeff, you can, maybe you can
One of
answer
us will handle it.
When I'm looking at the number, I'm looking at 25 and a half full-time equivalents for cuts. Is that correct?
I count 23.5, getting me to the 1789.
Okay, and in that number, is the number, where is the...
I'm sorry, you are correct. I factored out those that were new people. Just existing, it is 23.5.
Okay. Is the number for the unemployment also factored into this 1.789 million number, or does the town have to carry that side?
Let me explain. The reason why it's an offset is because we will save the health insurance for those people that are cut. So on one hand, you know, if you have a family plan, it's $15,000. We now no longer have to pay that, but we'll have to pay that money out on unemployment for the 1 year, and then it will be a savings after that.
I understand. And just, you know, just to Jeff's comments, I do agree that there's a sense of urgency. I do think that we are at the 11th hour, and I think that that's of our own volition, because we don't meet regularly throughout the year. And I think that that's a process. I know that we're dealing with the immediate issue here, but I think going forward, you know, this issue is not going away. It's not going away even if an override were to pass. So we need to start looking at ways to contain costs, and we need to start doing it as a collective group. And I think we need to, you know, and the reason we shouldn't be sitting here today, this is not new to us. We've all been acutely aware that this has been coming down the pike, and we need to start sitting down together, and we need to work toward doing that. So obviously I'm not going to be here, so it's easy for me to say that, but you know, I do agree.
But it's not unique to Wareham.
It's not unique to Wareham.
Wherever you go.
I guess my point is, though, is we do need to start to come together, because these are serious problems. And I do fully, you know, I fully agree that the cuts are going to be painful on both sides. And it pains me to see, you know, really the level of cuts that we need to make to the town, because they are going to destroy the town at some point. So I hope we can all work together to find some creative solutions.
I think Mrs. Winslow's, and then you'll be
Just
next.
to that point.
Right. You're done, Mike.
I'm done.
Mrs. Winslow? Go ahead.
Sorry, just to that point, the nice thing that we have here is that there's a precedent set for that. We did have an ad hoc committee that was made up of 2 members of the school committee, 2 members of the Board of Selectmen, and 2 members of the FinCom. There was a recommendation for that committee to go forward to talk about this, because no one in that room, when we were talking about healthcare trusts, how to balance this budget last year, everyone in that room knew that the shoe was going to fall. There was going to be an issue going into this year. So there was a recommendation, and I strongly supported that committee continue, and I'll strongly ask for that committee to come back together going into next year.
Just the sad part of that is the townspeople had to vote to basically bring us together to do that. That's the sad part.
But the committee, the idea for that committee was already there before it was actually put on town meeting. So that committee met, and then yes, it was brought up on town meeting floor, but we established that recommendation and had meetings before that was actually brought before town meeting. So,
Mrs. Winslow?
I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is a sense of urgency on both the school side and the town side. If the town is going to make this level of draconian cuts, then there needs to be letters sent out to the 11 unions on Monday, and they need to be sitting down with us and having a conversation. We don't have a long time till town meeting, and these processes are not easy, and they're certainly not painless. An hour and a half a week pay to certain people at certain pay levels may not be a lot of money, but to somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck and doesn't have an extra $2 to buy a coffee on a Friday morning, it's a big deal. And these conversations need to be happening now. I don't want to support level funding a school budget, but I don't think we have a choice. I don't see any other option out there at this point. I don't know how many less people and how many less hours and how much less the town can do for its citizens. I think if the school committee is willing to level fund the budget, then this board should be willing to put the questions to the public on the ballot. This is a question for the general public to decide. They're the ones that are impacted the greatest by these decisions that we make. If we put override and debt exclusion questions on the ballot and they don't pass, then we have to live with those consequences. If we put those questions on the ballot and people say, you know, I think the extra money is worth it and I'm willing to pay it, then that doesn't solve all our problems, but it's a measure towards getting to a better place financially for the community as a whole. I would certainly be willing to have that conversation, but we have got to come to some point here, it's almost 12:15, about if the town makes its proposed cuts on the staffing and can get agreements with the unions, and if the school makes its reductions, it looks like we're at like a roughly $400,000 difference at that point. Is that correct? Okay. I mean, that's still a huge number to deal with, but if we can at least agree today that the town will go forward and have a conversation with its employees, that the school committee will recommend a level funded budget, and that we will support asking the voters how they feel. That's what we're doing. We're just asking the voters to look at the situation and make a decision for themselves. Then we're down to a much more manageable number, even though it's still painful from there. But that would be my suggestion. And Mr. Chair, at least for our board, I would make a motion to that effect that the town will move forward with its proposed budget, taking whatever action is necessary, that the school committee on March 21st will recommend a level funded budget, and that the Board of Selectmen will, as a consensus, agree that we won't oppose the ballot questions.
I would second that for discussion. Oh, and I would also move that you go on to the next subject, and we'll come back to that when Mrs. Begley comes back. I'd like her to be here to hear this.
I just want to make a note that the article as written for the 2.5 override, as it stands right now, only covers the teacher layoffs. Okay, I just wanted everybody to understand that, to note that. I mean, it certainly can be amended later on, but as written right now, it doesn't cover the cuts we're going to make to town government. It only says teacher layoffs.
All right. Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, rather than go look it up, Mrs. Catulli, could you read that exactly as it's... Oh, I thought you had it open, Bonnie. Okay.
To see if the town... I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me? It's 26. To see if the town will vote to appropriate through a Proposition 2.5 override a sum of money to avoid teacher layoffs or take any action relative thereto.
And for a point of information, that number would be $780,000.
What was that again? 780. Any other questions from the board? I'm asking all boards, even though it's our board that. Yes.
Just so once again we're on the same page. The override's for the 780 at the bottom. You got debt exclusions up there for the textbooks and technology, but the rest of that stuff goes away.
That is correct.
That's
so
what
that there'll be no new positions. There will be other people that will lose their jobs. There are 4 people there that will lose their jobs in the top part. What I said was for teachers, and that's the 780 is just for the teachers that would lose their jobs because of this cut.
My point being is that there are reductions in the school side as well.
That is correct.
There's give and take back.
Just to put the $780,000 operational override in context, for the median taxpayer, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, and please feel free to do so, if $1 million to the average taxpayer is something on the order of $63, 68? That number keeps changing. Okay. So we can take about 3/4 of that, call that a little over $50. So the median taxpayer would see approximately a permanent increase, absent an underride, permanent increase of about $50 a year. Just so everybody understands what that operational override would mean. Now, since I don't want anybody to have any misunderstanding, the debt exclusions in total are $1.3 million, which works out to about $20 a year for 5 years. So that would mean $70 a year, and then it would drop down to $50 at the end of the 5th year. There's only one problem with that little analysis. I wish it was that simple. And that is while the textbooks and technology, the roof on the high school, and the forest feasibility study are legitimately one-time things, and people will have the ability to say, ultimately, theoretically, no to the debt exclusion associated with building the school, which hopefully will be about 2/3 funded by the state. It is legitimate to call the buses a debt exclusion because they're capital items, but it's not legitimate in a sense because for the foreseeable future, we're going to have these constant debt exclusions to pay on an annual basis to get about 5 new buses. So I think it would be very misleading for the taxpayers to think that this solves the bus transportation problem. As Ellen and I know, because we're participating on the Action Committee, we haven't come to any conclusions about that, and we're meeting again on the 20th to continue that process. But it is a vote to support all of this is, in fact, about $70, and then at the end of 5 years would revert to $50 for the median taxpayer. But that doesn't solve the ongoing problem of transportation. But the taxpayers deserve full disclosure.
No doubt. But there may be other avenues in which the buses can be taken care of at a later date. Okay, onward. So you're looking at $70 a year, and we don't necessarily have to vote to all agree to that. We don't even have to vote. But from their standpoint, they just either have to support the effort to put it on the ballot. That's really all they have to do.
With respect, Mr. Chairman, I think I'm personally looking for more than that. I'm looking for support I'm looking for consensus within this room behind that idea that this is good for the town. If the voters choose to reject the political leadership of this town and say, sorry, you don't quite get it, we can't afford it, we're in foreclosure, we can't put food on our table, I accept that and I will honor that decision. But what I'm looking for from the political leadership in this town is support because they think it's good for the town, for the average taxpayer to invest $70 a year for the next 5 years and $50 a year on an ongoing basis. That's what Speaking only for myself, that's what I'm looking for.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. I don't know if Ellen stepped out. But
We haven't had any discussion on it
we
yet.
haven't had any, but I was wondering, did you hear the motion? I'll have her repeat it. Okay.
I want to apologize. I had to step out and cancel a 1 o'clock appointment. When I saw how this was going, I thought, well, I might as well cancel the appointment. Mr. Holmes just told me what the motion was on the floor, and that was that you would present it, correct me if I'm wrong, present a level-funded budget if there was a motion to support the override and the debt exclusions. You know, I'm looking at the budget from the town side, and as Selectman Winslow put it, we've got draconian cuts. And we have an increase in the school budget. And we've had this discussion round and round, Mr. Sweat, that I absolutely know that we have to educate our children. But when it comes, like with the school buses, we had a Transportation Action Committee meeting, and we discussed Plan B, which would be fees for service, those kinds of things, not transporting children that lived under 2 miles from the school, those kinds of things. And then I saw a debt exclusion to purchase 5 buses. Now, decreasing the transportation for the children, we asked how many fewer buses would this be accomplished with, and that was 13. And then I see that there's a debt exclusion for 5 new buses. 5 buses are not going to solve the problem. You're talking about something that would be ongoing. It would be 5 buses, then 5 buses, then 5 buses. So for us to say that these are debt exclusions, it really is an override. Let's call it what it is. And until I am not going to support cutting town services to absolute bare minimum, and this is all contingent on going to the unions, negotiating this, closing town hall for at least 1 day a week. We have other towns in this Commonwealth that have had to close their libraries. Close them, just close them, because they can't afford to keep them. So until I see the same, unpleasant as it may be, the same kinds of cuts that are made, not as, okay, if you don't vote for this, this is what's going to happen. We're already doing, this is what's going to happen on the town side. So no, I can't support it.
Yes. Kara? Yes.
Mr. Chair, just as a point of clarification, the motion that I made, Mrs. Begley, was contingent upon the town going to the unions. And while I agree that on paper it looks like we're making a larger sacrifice, if you will, one of the challenges that the school department faces is the costs that it can't control, such as the unfunded mandates and the requirements to provide the level of education that a child needs, and no matter what that expense may be. And those are things that we just don't have a choice about. We can't say to a family that moves in that has a child that has services in the $150,000 neighborhood, oh, I'm sorry, we can't afford you, we cut you out of the budget. And that's the bottom line issue. The underlying problem with the school budget is that the state simply doesn't support education the way that it once did, and that responsibility is now falling upon our shoulders as the local taxpayer. And do I think that's fair to have to increase people's taxes when really the burden should be on the people that are designing the mandates? No. But again, what other choice do we have? And there's no guarantee with anything. My motion is more, and I'll ask Attorney Bowen to explain it a little bit clearer than I can, is to move this process forward from here so that we can narrow what we believe is the gap, so we can get beyond today. Both parties have items they've got to accomplish in order to get this budget even that narrowed. So I'll let Attorney, because he's a little bit more schooled in this than I am.
Mrs. Bowen, Mr. Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I understand things as they sit right now, the school committee wants an idea of whether there's going to be support from the Board of Selectmen for the debt exclusion and the override.
Point of, I have to say this. There has been no discussion
I
with the
understand.
school committee about that. I am speaking for myself. My colleague sitting next to me can feel free to contradict me. So I want to make it clear there's been no discussion whatsoever. I am only speaking as one member and the chairman who put it on the agenda.
I stand corrected. The chairman of the school committee wants an idea of whether there will be support for a debt exclusion in an override. For there to be a debt exclusion and an override under Chapter 59, Section 21C, the Board of Selectmen is the only authority that can vote to put those on the ballot. And the third fact here is, regardless of whether those go on the ballot or not, regardless of whether the voters approve any such questions as might go on the ballot, the budget assumptions presented by Derek are going to require considerable cuts that have to be reduced to an action list, which would have to be presented to the various town-side unions for some sort of action. A process that will be, I'll add parenthetically, neither quick nor easy. Now, as I understand Selectman Winslow's motion, Selectman Winslow is asking for a consensus vote as to whether the Board of Selectmen would be willing to entertain placing said ballot questions on the ballot. The Board of Selectmen could not take that vote today because it requires a level of formality and it's not on the agenda, which is why I believe you're asking for a consensus rather than a binding commitment to put them on. And I think that's where we're at.
And just to be clear, the list that you have in front of you, every single dollar, if the debt exclusions and the override were not passed, would be cut. Every single dollar. If the override was passed, then the $780,000 would not be cut. And if the debt exclusions were passed, then the two items on the top would be spent, but everything else would also be cut. Am I correct in that? Correct. Thank you.
Mr. Begg. Excuse me.
So this motion is for consensus. However, we have not heard from the school committee formally as to how the school committee would proceed with their budget.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. First, the first piece was this document, I believe, this town budget that I'm looking at, prepared by Mr. Sullivan, changed at 3:17, so I'm assuming that was 5 a.m. And I know that Mr. Andrews and Mr. Sullivan and the department heads continue to work on this, and this is different than the copy I saw last night. And so this is an evolving document. And then they have to take this and go out and get it approved by the various unions, departments, etc. And then we have to look at it as the Board of Selectmen, as the policy setters, to make sure that what Mr. Andrews and Mr. Sullivan come back to us with is appropriate for the town as the policymakers. So one, I'm not prepared to give you a consensus vote on this document because it's not complete and it hasn't totally been presented. That's number one. Number two, the Board of Selectmen, in my opinion, took action last Tuesday, and to Mr. Schneider, we held off individual votes so that you'd be present, but we had to close the warrant. So this board took its action as required under the charter on Tuesday night and placed these overrides and these debt exclusions on the warrant article for town meeting. As I heard last Wednesday night at the school board meeting, where they were looking for guidance from the town meeting voters. So this board took that action already and put it out in front of the townspeople who attend town meeting. Correct? Is everybody with that so far?
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, is that not correct?
We did put them on, but we didn't vote on it as individuals.
We have not voted individually, but we
But they
closed
are-
the warrant. They're on the warrant.
They're on the warrant.
They're on the warrant. So the Board of Selectmen have taken that action. To ask me about a consensus vote as to whether I'm going to put it on the ballot, if I'm voting today, I vote no. So if that's what you're looking for, you get no on both those two accounts. In terms of this $70, it's fantasy land. Because if you look at the two, I asked Mrs. Catulli to reread that piece. There's no time frame on that article. And if it's passed, does that mean that next year, and I'm not looking for an answer, that next year, if we spend money and we come down to 23 teachers, does that add to that Prop 2.5 override? Is that what we're going to do to fund teachers? Right? That's a rhetorical question. So this year, it's for the future, it's going to cost $50 a year. On the debt exclusions, that's only $20 for the first year. Because next year, we'll be right back here again with another debt exclusion, with buses and everything else that people need to buy. Then it's going to be another $20. So in year 2, we're up to $90, right? And then the next year, it's going to be another $20. So in year 3, we're up to $110. And this is going to be a yearly piece that's going to come before town voters. So as you look at it today, in my opinion, Mr. McDonald, I see you shaking your head. Today, it's $70 if you approve everything. But next year, that number is going to go up. And then in 5 years, you'll drop 20, but you'll have picked up probably 60 or 80. And then if the town side jumps in on it, it gets even worse. So I'm not prepared to put that on a ballot, certainly. And I would like to see, and I thought we saw this, but I would like to see a document Mr. Sullivan prepared, and I think that's what some of the members are asking for the school department, just like he's prepared. Here's what we said, here's what I proposed. I mean, this is fine, but there's no assumption sheet with this either that says, it's 1.789. We've had some verbal discussion, but there's nothing there to read. I'd like to see something like this, that the selectmen and the townspeople, they're going to ask these questions. Where are these cuts being made? Who is it? Well, not by name, but by department and by category, just like Mr. Sullivan did for us. So I'm not prepared today to support that motion.
Well, right now, we got 51 warrants. Now, we only voted on a couple because Mr. Snyder wasn't there. And on the warrants, the exclusion and the 2.5 are on the warrant. So it's up to the town to do it. FinCom and ourselves, we need to put our vote on it so they can see where we're coming from. They're saying consensus. If we vote on the warrant today, which it is on the agenda, that gives them whether we have consensus or not.
Mr. Chairman, I would respectfully disagree with that. That is not Mrs. Winslow's motion. Mrs. Winslow's motion.
I didn't say it was her motion. I'm saying
we're voting on a motion right now.
Okay, it's a question. Right now, it's question and answers. What I'm saying is everything we're talking about is already on the ballot. All they're talking about, they need a vote, or Mr. Sweat said a consensus. When we vote on the warrant, as it is, when we do, and we say 3-2 or 4-1, that automatically is giving them whether we vote in favor of or against it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
My view of this is that the Board of Selectmen, consistent with what Selectman Holmes has said, the Board of Selectmen has already done its job as far as this part goes. I think the school committee, at this point, I'd like to hear from the school committee as a whole, and I appreciate your being here, but it was actually a question I asked before the meeting. It was, does Mr. Sweat's opinion reflect the opinion of the entire school committee? And I appreciate your candor that it doesn't necessarily do that. I don't think that I would be prepared today to make a motion to support or not support. I think putting it on the ballot has done that. I think we need to hear from the school committee and make sure that that what you described earlier as the school, as you felt the school committee would support, they actually will do that. Because, quite frankly, last year we had an agreement sitting in front of this Board of Selectmen regarding the healthcare trust fund money. And to my knowledge, that agreement had never been consummated by the school committee. So forgive me, but I would like to have something formal from the school committee saying that if this Board of Selectmen did vote to support it, this is what would take place.
Okay, I think a motion was brought before us. Any questions? Right. Okay, yeah. Motion was brought before us. We had the questions. Are we ready for a vote? Okay, you want to read the motion again? Well, everybody's in favor?
It'll be on the tape of the motion. Mrs. Winslow, do you want to repeat it, please?
Mr. Chair, the motion is simply to get a consensus from the Board of Selectmen to move forward with the proposed cuts to the budget by having the town notify the unions and engage in collective bargaining, by having the school committee go to its committee with their level funded budget, and for the Board of Selectmen to not oppose placing the ballot questions on the ballot. That was my motion.
And we're second by Mr. Holmes.
Correct. For discussion.
Okay, discussion period's over. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No.
What was that?
1, 4, 0.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes.
might. The Finance Committee at this point is faced with one budget and one budget only. That budget was presented to us on December 15th. It is for $52.8 million, and in
Excuse me,
revenues
excuse me,
and
wait up,
52.
Wait up. There was conversation going on. Could you start over again?
Yes. The Finance Committee has a single budget that has been presented to it. All right, for $52.8 million in revenue and $52.8 million in expenses. There's a great deal of line item detail in that budget, but those are the basic numbers. Today, you presented us, or put before us, another document that says you're thinking that it's liable to be more like some number. And it doesn't make any difference. We have one budget and one budget only. If you wish to revise that, we need that by next Wednesday. We can't wait any further, any longer. I've scheduled for the FinCom the meeting on Wednesday to consider the budget presented to us by the Board of Selectmen, the Town Administrator, under the guidance of the Board of Selectmen. Otherwise, I have to take action on the December 15th budget.
Okay, Mr. Town Administrator?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we have sent electronically, and we're happy to come on Wednesday, and I think we're scheduled to be on to talk about the changes from the presented budget in December, which is the long shot luck. Let's be all clear about this. I don't know any town, any city that can present a budget in December that's going to be reflective of revenues and local aid estimates that consummate sometime in March or in early April. So I do respect the chairman's point. We will be there on Wednesday night to describe to you the amended presented budget to stay in balance going forward with respect to the most recent version that Mr. Sullivan has presented. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Am I hearing that you will bring what was presented today as your revised numbers on Wednesday?
That's correct. And in fact, Mr. Sullivan, correct me if I'm wrong, did we not send this out electronically to, if we I'm sure you didn't send it out at 5 a.m., but we can get it to you today, Mr. Chairman, for you. And
I think the point on this would be that these are listed as work papers for discussion,
Okay.
and what they're looking for is the proper budget with the FY11 actuals and
Sure.
so forth going on. So, and we will have that and present that Wednesday night.
Right. Important number on this new document that you're describing to me is the number for the school department. The number on here is $26.5 million. That is very different than what was presented to us in the December budget, which was a little over $25 million. which number am I using?
Mr. Chairman, I would use the most recent number, as I believe we've described. The foundation budget due by the town administrator on December 15th is a number. It's a starting point.
So use the 26.5.
That is correct, unless I'm missing something, Mr. Sullivan.
Then my question has to be, is the Board of Selectmen in agreement with that number that's being presented to us?
Mr. Chairman, I think the chairman was pretty clear, with all due respect, that the Article number 6 still needs the vote of the Board of Selectmen, which will go forward, I hope, next Tuesday or sometime shortly thereafter. So the Finance Committee will have some signal from the Board of Selectmen with regards to the adjusted budget.
Time is of the essence. I have 21 days to review 51 articles. We have. And of those, 70%, I believe, require written recommendations from the FinCom. I have to really say I'm disappointed that we can't get a consensus today, so I know what to use, so we can start to do the work and to write these articles. All right, I'll watch Tuesday night and see what happens. But I need to know what we need to know. I keep saying I. It's not I. I, as chairman, need to have a document to present to them to take action on Wednesday night. And most important number is the school number. Thank you.
Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you very much. Ron.
Just a point of clarification. The number that you're going to be using going forward is the 26, not in your budget the number that the school committee has proposed or has recommended.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Rhonda.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan has worked closely with Anna and Barry and myself to get a number. So we have a different placeholder, unless I'm missing something. Is that not correct, Mr. Sullivan?
There is no, what Dr. Rabinovich says, what Derek says, what Anna says is irrelevant. Meaning, the January 25th vote of the school committee is the only thing that exists as of this moment per the charter.
Takes care of that.
That is 20.
Mrs. Begley?
I'm sorry, it's,
I understand,
Excuse me. Mrs. Begley has the floor.
I understand what Mr. Sweat said, what Chairman Sweat said, but I guess my point being, isn't the budget at this point, it's a living document. I mean, we have a whole lot of variables in this document. We all knew this was coming, absolutely, no question. But it's certainly not going to make anybody else's job easier for us to be critical of one another, and I don't think that that's anybody's intention here. I think that the level of frustration is great because a great deal of work has been put into the budget already, and there's a great deal of work to be done, and I absolutely appreciate Chairman Heath's concerns about them wanting to be able to vet this thoroughly and to be able to give intelligent responses to each and every line item, and I appreciate that. But it's a living document, and I can't imagine that every single one of these numbers is going to be set in stone at this point when there are so many variables involved.
Town Administrator, please.
Mr. Chairman, just real quick, I would like to go forward with the same spirit and cooperation we started out with. You know, I don't believe that the printer sets the timeline for making some of these changes. So if that's what schedules are about, that I'm missing something, this is about human impact to all of the departments in town, including the school committee. I will put in the number that I'm required to, talk with council, that I'm required to. I would hope that the school committee would take some type of action to come and to meet us, because we've spent hundreds of hours looking at this. We want to work in a cooperative fashion. I'll put the number in that's been recommended by the school body, because I don't have another number to put in, and that's what town council has advised. So to Chairman Heat's point, that's the number that you get. And that will mean, once again, as I've started out with that we talked about earlier, we're going to close buildings down. We're going to close departments down. People will be leaving town service, and with respect to the fiscal 2013 budget. I thought that we were all, and I would like to move forward with the highest level of cooperation, knowing that we have to come to some middle ground, to Mr. McDonald's point and other members of this committee, the board and the school committee, so that we can stay in lockstep. But I'm not going to let the printer tell me when we need to present this final version, because we need to work on this together. We need to be able to provide a revised budget, and I do understand schedules, but I do want to make certain that we move forward in a very cooperative fashion, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
Bonnie?
I certainly empathize with the town administrator's perception of not letting the printer dictate. Unfortunately, the Finance Committee has to render an opinion on this budget, all right, and it has to be in writing. So we have a time limit and a schedule here. I really came here today to try to get some level of cooperation between three boards as a plan for the future. And that's just not happening here. And I feel extremely, extremely frustrated that we have been delayed, put off. People didn't show up for meetings when they could have gotten that information that they needed at the time. I'm pretty much all done here today. I'm starving and I would like to go home. I just wanted the public to know what's going on here, what these cuts are going to mean. And I personally do not want to make an 11th hour decision like we have done in the past 2 years. I'm just not going to do it. We're going to take the budget numbers that we have on Wednesday and decide what that means and take our vote. And I guess we're just going to have to stand behind it. But I'm all done here today. Thank you.
Mr. Heat?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, today we were given a schedule. It says the school committee budget scenario. My understanding would be is that has all the town adjustments in it, and it has the school's voted number. That's the number that's really what we should be working with right now. Can we agree upon that? So we can look at the department cuts that are happening in town hall.
Mr. Town Administrator?
You need to repeat that, Mark?
Say again, Mr.
All
Chairman.
right. The fourth column, right, is the school committee budget scenario. That has all your adjustments and uses the school committee's voted number. Is that what the FinCom should be working off of currently?
That's my understanding, Mr.
Very
Sullivan.
good. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I do want to make a comment because I think it's important for this this group, these two committees, to hear from another member of the school committee. I can't speak for my board either. I do understand the difficult situation that we're in right now. I have felt that we need to ask our administrators, our principals, to come in and give us exactly what they feel is what's needed to educate our children. There is a process that they go through through the school committee, through the superintendent, the FinCom, the Board of Selectmen, all have an opportunity to see those numbers presented in a format similar to what's been presented here. And so I do feel like that we have gone through our due diligence. But the times that we're in, we understand that additional cuts need to be made. And so what you have in front of you are those additional cuts to be able to get us to level funding. The concern that I have is even what is in the town administrator's budget right now is not level funding from last year. So it is still $300,000+ under level funding. So even if I could support, I understand where we're at, we're going to have to do level funding because there's no new revenue coming in. I could get behind that, but I do need to be able to see the idea for me to support any budget that would cut additional 21 teachers is unacceptable. And you can go and take a look, and everyone can have their own opinion around where you can cut $100,000 here, or a little bit more administration here, or you know what, go buy some cheaper food, renegotiate contracts. There's no way that it's anywhere near to what is needed, and I don't even think it's anywhere near to even the $300,000+ that we need to get to. So if you want to hear from one other member of the school committee, and what you're going to hear on Wednesday is, yes, I would ask my superintendent to present to me exactly what level funding means. And again, it's mostly this, but I am going to do whatever I can to get this town to understand that we're going to need to raise additional funds, because I cannot, absolutely cannot accept 21 additional teachers being cut from our school system. So I just thought it was important for this board to hear another member from the school committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
We have deadlines. Wednesday's our deadline, but I want everybody to keep this in mind. Last year at town meeting, when it came up about the healthcare trust fund or using the money, this statement was made. It's going to buy us a year to be intentional about the cuts, intentional about the services that would need to be cut. If we don't support this, they're going to be reactionary cuts. Now here we are a year later, no intentional cuts, we're in reactionary cut mode. We got a $2.7 million gap to make up, and we don't have a lot of time to do it in. So it comes down to responsibility. Here we are going to be responsible. Either the town or the state is going to have to make up that money. So I mean, there's no easy answer. I said it earlier. There's no easy answer, and unless we win the lottery.
Mr. Heath?
I'd also like to bring to your attention, the question came up as to whether it's the printer's deadline. The printer's deadline originally was April 9th, and it was the day that we wanted to get in there because we have to have stuff printed and ready for the town by charter. But there's a new deadline that I see, and it's April 16th. 16th, which is the day that the town administrator will be leaving. I would hope that we would have some things wrapped up so that we could finalize with him in the last few days, rather than being in the process of, this is my last pass.
Mr. Sweat? Jeff, but hold on, he wants to respond to.
Mr. Chairman, through you, Mr. Chairman Heath, I just want to be very clear about this. I indicated to the Board of Selectmen that I will come up with a transition plan. That transition plan is going to be focused on the fiscal side of the house. I will alter my schedule beginning Monday morning relative to what needs to be done, and I'll do the best I can, not only through that period of time, but after that period of time. You know, I'm still only an hour away. We have very important matters at hand. Working with Mr. Sullivan, Attorney Bowen, and other staff, we'll forge ahead. I once again, just want to point out that these issues, as Mr. McDonald has pointed out, Selectman Schneider and others, that we knew this a year ago. Let's be honest about this. We knew what we needed to do a year ago. So let's use this time, the valuable time, in the spirit of cooperation to forge the best plan that we can. I'm required by the attorney, just told me to put the school committee's budget in. So let's not just play tag here, because that's not going to get me what I need. Let's bring back a plan, working with the administration. Unless I'm missing something, we're going to come up with this through the administrative side of the with recommendations to the respective bodies, and we can do that. We have time. I'm just once again focusing on the bottom line numbers and the processes that we have to put in place because we are required by law to notify the unions, and that we need to have that process take hold. That's going to be job one on Monday morning. So I will work with you continuously to make sure that we can get the town meeting with the number. And I do agree with what Bonnie said, because you know what? This isn't something that just happened overnight. Okay, we had surpluses in our stabilization fund 10 years ago that were wiped out. We have been putting them back in. We eclipsed the $500,000. I'm not suggesting we go there, but somebody let that happen over time. It wasn't people perhaps around this table, but somebody did. So let's be honest and upfront about this. Let's go forward with the spirit to try to solve these problems and get to the best number that we can.
Mr. Chairman.
And that will have to be voted by the school committee to be able to get us to some middle ground. I'm committed to making that happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sweat?
I candidly sit here at a loss as to what is expected of the school committee with respect to this situation. We have two outside bodies who have unofficially, and their official reports will be coming in shortly over the next few months, who are going to tell us we are significantly underfunding our children. And that it has turn your mic back on. And that it has implications for the quality of adults that we're going to produce to send out into the world by Wareham. for us to not be fighting to get an acceptable level of funding for these 3,000 children, you might as well tell us to crawl into a hole. I'm just not going to do that. We are asking for support for a level-funded budget. I shouldn't say we. I think I can speak for Rhonda and certainly Barry, not for the whole school committee. We're asking for support for a level-funded budget which we know to be inadequate and that may, in fact, significantly put our children at risk. We're just asking for a consensus that that's an acceptable thing, knowing that significant cuts are going to have to be made just to get that point, and that everything else that we really want to do for the education of our children is going to be up to the voters to decide, and we can't get that opinion, even though we have been as transparent as we could possibly be since the beginning of December.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, if I might make a correction here, I don't believe Mr. Sweat is being accurate. This Board of, if you're talking about the vote that was just taken by this Board of Selectmen,
I'm not.
The vote was asked about a ballot question. This Board of Selectmen voted to put all of the debt exclusions, all of the 2.5 business on the town meeting warrant for our voters and taxpayers to look at and vote on. That's what came out of the meeting I watched the other night of your board on TV, that we were going to a town meeting to get a guideline. That's what this board has done. If you are asking the members of a board to come to some consensus on a future vote, to put something on a ballot, that's not, I don't even believe that's reasonable. I think you've got the support you wanted on these exclusion articles by this board who voted to put it on the warrant for the taxpayers to look at. That's my comment.
Mr. Sweat, continue. You have the floor.
With due respect to Mr. Holmes, putting something on the warrant, as this old saying goes, I'm sure inflation has destroyed the validity of this statement, that and 50 cents will get you on the subway. Not anymore. I was looking for nothing binding, just a feeling from this body that a certain minimum level of funding was necessary for the children of this town. I'm sorry. It's an emotional thing with me. I don't really apologize for that. I retract my apology. It is an emotional thing for me. I didn't get that emotional level of support. I'm sorry. It wasn't even binding. I wasn't even going to quote you. But I am being forced to go back to my school committee and say, guys, Rhonda and I were there. I can't guarantee that there will be the political support for the children of Wareham just at a level funding. That's what I come away from this meeting with. I'm sorry. I'm done.
Mr. Holmes?
The chairman, motion to adjourn.
Motion made to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn the FinCom meeting?
Mr. Chairman, that's our board.
Okay. Right.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
So adjourned.